All right, so I'm going to get on my soapbox. I'm on a podcast for this. If it's
go.
okay, let me let it rip. All right.
Worst that'll happen is you're going to be late for that wedding.
Bonnie,
hope it's not one of your kids getting married.
No. Bonnie says to me, she goes, "Are you going to get like arrested for saying some of this stuff?" I said, "I don't know. I guess when the revolution starts, they'll find this." All right.
What's up, guys? I'm here to tell you this episode is brought to you by Crowd Health. Crowd Health is a new, fast-growing, tech-enabled, well-capitalized, community-powered alternative to traditional health insurance. Founded by Andy Schoonover, a proven founder and entrepreneur with a successful track record, including a $100 million plus exit. By the way, Andy's been on this podcast in the past. Crowd Health uses the power of crowdfunding, member ratings, unlimited choice, and huge cash pay discounts to provide a simple, considerably less expensive solution to managing your medical bills. Crowd Health gives you full agency and sticks with you no matter where you move or what jobs you take on. You've heard of Big Pharma, but you may not know Big Insurance is actually the man behind the curtain. With 12 of the last 15 heads of the FDA taking jobs in Big Pharma and 64% of its funding coming from private industry, don't hold your breath waiting for the government to save the day. It's safe to say our system's broken. It's time to take your well-being into your own hands, and Crowd Health helps you do just that. You'll pay into your individual account monthly, and if you ever want to leave, you'll simply pay a $250 closing fee, and they will return the entire balance in your account to you because it's your account. Because it's crowdfunded, we all have a vested interest in each other's health. They even cover up to $300 a year in routine wellness visits. So far, for every $100 members have paid into their accounts, an average of only $30 has been paid out. So you can expect to see your money grow in your account over time. Take that, Big Insurance. Join today by visiting joincrowdhealth.com and using the promo code KLP to pay only $99 a month for the first 3 months. That's joincrowdhealth.com, promo code KLP. Joincrowdhealth.com. Get you some. All right, Rick Haley, welcome back.
Good to be back.
Yeah, good to see you, brother. We were just talking about how good you look. We can jump in right there.
I appreciate it. Same. Some rounded shoulders.
Yeah, man. Yeah. First Saturday edition of the podcast. You know, we had like a year and a half that we weren't recording these at all, and I think you're like, I don't know, second or third.
Nice. Thank you.
We haven't even started releasing them yet, but we mostly record on Thursday nights, but this is a little Saturday morning edition, which is fun. Yeah. I want to sneak you in to talk about America.
That's a subject that I love.
Yes, I know. I know you do. You know, I guess maybe this is somewhat open for interpretation, you know, how various people can look at the same set of facts and come up with different conclusions. So, you know, I want to be well aware of the fact that I might be a product of my own environment. But to me, uneducated in this area, not an expert, it looks like America, if you were to give it a report card, it would not do very good right now. I mean, it looks like we're trending in a not a good direction. Like if you look kind of across the whole, I mean, you can just, you know, we can just pick an area. Economically, we're not doing great right now. Education is not great right now. I saw some stat that in terms of developed countries or industrialized nations, we're like 37th in math.
Yeah.
I mean, and we can just, you know, the culture war doesn't seem to be going well. We seem to be more polarized than ever.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about more polarized than ever. 2020 seemed even worse, but I'm less concerned about that and more concerned about these institutions that at one point we seemed to place trust in, and that trust seemed to be mostly well-founded. Increasingly, I think more and more people would say they don't feel like those institutions are worthy of trust anymore.
I agree completely.
And that's a real issue. And then when you have people, I also think some people would say that there's people in power and the elites in this country that do not seem to have our best interests in mind and are making decisions that are good for themselves. And China seems to be playing a part in quite a lot of those decisions, as it turns out.
Sure.
So we can talk more about all that, but I actually want to jump in here, which is something that I've wondered about but never talked to anyone about. Do you know how empires would come and go, and it would take hundreds of years for some of these things to come and go? Is that going to be a thing that continues, like in our modern society now, with all of our, everything's documented now on the internet, and it just seems like 1,000 years from now, they're going to be able to know more about us now than we know about society 1,000 years ago, right? Because these things they stay around longer. We're not just writing things on paper and putting them in caves or whatever. But our empire, I guess the question is, should we expect empires to continue to come and go like they have in the past?
They will.
They will.
They will continue to come and go. The old saying, there's nothing new under the sun. I think that's so applicable, to what we're dealing with. There's nothing new under the sun. And so,
hold on one second.
Yeah.
Kobe just passed me a note and said, the music is on again. Good grief. I had a Sonos over here, and I did this exact same thing the other night. All right, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Music's off.
There's nothing new under the sun.
By the way, Kobe, just holler on the mic. You don't have to.
He's being professional, So we're going to see these things happen, and the fact you said that's more documented is going to allow us to see that. So there were plenty of empires that rose and fell. I'm sure there's some that we don't even know about because they didn't have a written record, or the record is spotty and those type of things. So as information becomes, it's amazing, these devices we have in our pockets. I mean, you used to be able to make millions of dollars a year because you knew the things that we can now easily access in our phones. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that information makes you obsolete. It doesn't make people who have information obsolete. So the thing that you're having to look at is the application of the information. That's the difference nowadays, because information is so readily available. It's out there, but can you apply it? Can I give you an example? So we live in a log home, and there's several sides of this log home that are large, and they're tall too. Everybody wants a log home construction, or a lot of people do, but they don't want the maintenance that goes with it. It's insane, especially with bees. Carpenter bees are a big deal. So we had ours covered in hardy siding. It looks beautiful.
So it's a real log.
It's a real log home.
But you cover the outside in hardy board.
That's correct. Yeah.
Wow.
So
that home's indestructible.
It is indestructible.
Good grief. I've never heard of that one time.
It's a 10-inch square log with Tyvek house wrap and hardy board on the outside.
No
way.
I mean,
it's legit.
How long was the house up before you put the hardy board on?
It was built in 1989, and the guy that built it owned the second or third largest log home company in like the southern United States. And so it was his personal residence. So he overbuilt this thing. Cool. Like everything's 12 inches on center, like the floor joist instead of 16 or 22. I mean, it's insane. Wow. And so this is an example of finding something in one place and applying it to another. And so when they painted it, your trim is a different color than the main field, the main siding. And my wife and I were standing there looking at an inside corner with the painter, and he said, that's a piece of trim in the corner. I can paint it the color of the trim, which is actually lighter than the siding. He said, but I don't know how that would look. What do you want me to do? And so Bonnie and I stood there and we looked at it, and we both thought, keep it the same color as the siding. Well, my son, my 19-year-old Jack, had just happened to be walking by. I said, hey, come here a second. We're going to get your opinion. I said, we have a piece of inside trim here right there, and do we need to, what's your opinion? Should it be the color of the trim, or should it be the color of the main field? He goes, oh, no, Dad, I got this. He goes, I play Minecraft. This is a problem in Minecraft. I said, well, explain. He goes, when you build a house in Minecraft, you have trim colors. And if you make it the color of the trim, it looks weird. It definitely should be the color of the main field. And I was like, well, there you have it. Now, And immediately, like this, I looked at my wife and I kind of grinned, like, all right, like that is a real world application that he actually applied from a video game.
That is cool.
I thought it was so neat.
It's very cool.
And he probably never in a million years thought. But there are so many problems he's been able to solve because of the stuff he's learned from Minecraft. And he's really smart. And so, again, it's not the information itself. It's the application of the information. And that's the stage that we're in now. And so how does that relate to China? How does that relate to America? How does that relate to those things? Well, I can take my phone and I can look up a crazy history and just an insane amount of history about the United States. Its founding, let's say that. But how can I apply that to today and make a difference? Okay, so let's dive into that for a second. All right. So in the founding of America, you had I saw this the other day knowing that I was going to be on the podcast, and I actually looked this up. I've saved this to my phone so I could read this. This is insane. These are the ages of the founding fathers in 1776, okay? James Monroe was 18. I saw your eyebrows go up.
Hold on.
How old was Aaron Burr?
Hold on.
In 1776, how old was Aaron Burr?
Well, I mean, I have no idea.
He was 20. John Marshall, 20. Alexander Hamilton, 21. James Madison, 25. Benjamin Rush, 30. John Jay, 30. Thomas Jefferson was old. He was 33 when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Paine was 39. These guys, and the comment the person put here, this is great. He said, never lose sight of the fact that these wise men were just young men fighting tyranny. They weren't trying to be lifelong politicians. Oh. They were kids fighting for freedom. They literally were fighting for their life. When they signed that document, they realized it was their death warrant. If we lost that war, they were dead. And we get to look back on history knowing how it came out. The internment camps of the 1940s were in World War II. That is an explosive subject right now. I can't believe, but I do want to point out, by the way, it was done under a Democrat president, FDR. I want to point that out. Okay?
Wait, the internment camps of...
Japanese Americans were literally put in internment camps during World War II. They were American citizens of Japanese ancestry, and they were locked up.
In America?
Yes, sir.
So in World War II, we're in this war. So Japan's on the wrong side at this point.
That's
or
right.
at least the different side than us.
Right.
And we took Japanese Americans
Yes.
who were not spying for Japan.
No, they were regular American citizens.
And we had them in internment camps?
You're darn right.
Why have I never heard of this?
I don't know. Why have you
How
never
many?
heard of that? Thousands. Thousands and thousands.
Like a prison? Like we put them in prison?
Well, it depends on your perspective if it was a prison or not. But, I mean, when you're held against your will, one could say that's a prison.
Yeah.
No.
Like what were the facilities like? Or was it...
They had, like bungalows and those type of things. But yeah. And they were fed and taken well care of and all that stuff. They weren't like, in Auschwitz or something like that.
Were they trying to mitigate against these people coordinating amongst themselves, rising up from within?
That they were trying to mitigate that. They also didn't know where their loyalties lie.
Sure.
Now, you talk about controversial. Well, it's real easy to criticize that, knowing we won the war. Right? That's a tough decision to make. One that is very conveniently left out of FDR's his repertoire. When people talk about it, right? So so what happens is we got several things going. We got all this information, a flood of information that's just it's everywhere, with fewer and fewer people knowing how to apply the information. Okay. Then you got people who refuse to have common sense. And I do think it's a refusal. They just refuse to. You have the Ketanji Brown lady that just got put on the Supreme Court. This is a woman who sat in her hearing and refused to say what the definition of a woman was. She refused. She knows. You know she knows. I know she knows. She knows that I know she knows. She knows what a woman is. But she refused to say that definition. And so when you look at that, you say, well, that's insanity. Yeah. And we're not even talking about the whole trans debate and all that. Let's don't even talk. We don't even have to get into that. We know what a woman is. You know what a woman is. Go ahead and say it. It's okay. You can say it. We know you know. And she refused. And she's sitting on the highest court in the land. That's where we've gone with things. So that's an example of just regular common sense. I don't care what side of the aisle, quote unquote, you fall on. That's just common sense.
So when someone would you not look at that and look at that as a byproduct of the attack on freedom of speech? Because she knows, and I agree with your assessment that she knows.
Of course she does.
She's not saying it, though, for certain reasons.
That's right.
Probably no one held a gun to her head and said that you cannot answer or complete the sentence on what is the definition of a woman. Probably no one did that. But because of the systems and the habitual repercussions on certain things for saying certain things, and it's just it's like unspoken. It's like an unspoken rule that you can't talk about this.
That's right.
And that's ultimately just an attack, systemic attack on the freedom of speech. Is that what you would chalk that up as?
Sure. Part of it, yeah. And part of it, she's playing to a base of constituents that, she wants to satiate.
Sure. Yes.
But yeah.
Yep.
And so that's an example. And America is uniquely free in its speech. At least it was for many, many years. The change in America is not what shocks me. It's the rapidity. It's the speed at which we're seeing some of these things change so quickly. The idea of there's always been socialist or communist in America. Since its founding, since before its founding, there were people that leaned a certain way or other, even if they didn't use those titles, communism or socialism, but the concept or the idea. But the steam with which some of those things have gained in the last few years, it's just shocking.
Yeah.
It's just utterly surprising. And these are people who, when was the last major world war? Well, that's 80 years ago. So most of the people who were in the war are dead. Mm-hmm. So there are very few people alive who actually remember anything about World War II. Mm-hmm. So relatively speaking, Americans have encountered 80 years. I know we had Vietnam. I know we had Korea. I'm not trying to slight those things and enduring freedom and all that. I'm not trying to slight those. But a major world war that genuinely affected your day-to-day life. The average American was not affected by Vietnam on a daily basis. He went into the factory. He made the plant. He made tires for a living, and he went home and he played ball with his kid. But that wasn't necessarily the case in World War II. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you've had 80 years of peace, relative peace, and relative economic, not just stability, but economic excess. Mm-hmm. A very successful economic. There's been ups and downs, but for 80 years. And so what happens during those 80 years is you get detached from that. So those names I just read off of the founding fathers that were young, these guys were fighting a king who simply refused to acknowledge that America was going to be its own country. Well, you want the freedom? Well, you can come and get it. Mm-hmm. Well, they knew they were going to lose their fortunes, and they did, and they knew that they were going to lose their lives, and many of them did. They knew it was at stake, but they believed in what they believed in so much that they were worth losing this. They were willing to lose those things and fight for them. So the thing that I look at in America today is I go, well, what are people willing to fight for? What are they willing to die for? What are they willing to say, this is my line in the sand and I will not go past this?
Well, some people are willing to die for the sake of the vaccine. And I don't mean you took the vaccine and then you died. I don't mean that at all. I mean, some people are so woke that they have said on Twitter or wherever that they would rather take the vaccine and die from the vaccine, excuse me, than because at least then they feel like they're on the right side of history, than not have taken, excuse me, than not have taken the vaccine and they feel like that would be, in other words, they feel like it was more important, even if the vaccine killed them, to take it.
Wow.
So to answer your question, what are people willing to die for? Well, some people are willing to die for a what would you call that? A signaling? What's the political term? Like a
virtue signaling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Some people are willing to die for virtue signaling.
Yeah. And some
but
people
aside
also,
from that, to answer your question, what are people willing to die for? Well, not the same things that we used to be willing to die for.
Right.
And just not much in general. I mean, do you think that, because I would be in one of those at 38, I don't remember World War II. And And so most people now have grown up, myself included, with not having faced directly sort of a life or death situation in terms of our country battling some others. And do you think that sort of breeds almost a false sense of security?
I think it not only breeds a false sense of security, I think it breeds weak people. I mean, if you're always comfortable, if you're always fed, if you're always air conditioned, and listen, I obviously love food. You can tell. I obviously love air conditioning, and I love heat. I love knowing that when it gets cold, I go push a button on my wall, and boom, 30 minutes later, my house is nice. I love that. I like refrigeration. I'm not saying that we need to do without those things, but I am saying that when all you do is live in comfort and you're never uncomfortable, and that includes in your speech, in what you have to hear, and what you have to endure from others.
Yeah. That's a big point.
When it includes that, then it's like, well, okay. So the old saying, and we've heard it a million times. This is not new. I didn't create it, but good times breed weak men. Weak men breed bad times. Bad times breed strong men. Mm-hmm. And I may be butchering that a little bit, but that's the well, we're in the part where we've had good times, and so it breeds weak men. Well, why? And that's men and women, of course. But but why does it breed? Well, because you've never had to battle. There's I was in Italy a few years ago, and I think I may have mentioned this on the last podcast. We were there. We were wandering around wild boars. I was talking to the guy that in Tuscany. I know that sounds so pretentious. It does. Anybody that knows me, like I grew up, anyway, it just sounds like I need to hold my pinky out.
I like it.
But he was telling me that wild boars, there's 400,000 in the Tuscan region, and they are a German subspecies. And they came over to Italy, and they came over to that portion of Italy, and they have no predators. So they are prolific reproducers because nothing is killing them other than hunters. There's no wild animals that will take them out and control that population. So, well, how are you comparing that to people that are comfortable? Well, they've been able to proliferate because of that. Mm-hmm. Well, the ideals that people have are the same as those boars. I'm never going to have anybody push back on those ideas if we're all comfortable and happy. We think we know it all and we've got it all because look at us. We're a picture of success, right? I got a roof over my house. I got food in my belly. Goodness gracious, I got this thing down. Well, you've never been through a worldwide economic depression like we had in the 30s. People don't understand how bad it was. I mean, it was unbelievable. We had 50% unemployment. Let that wash over you for a minute. We lose our minds when we get to 6 or 7%. Mm-hmm. It was 50. Half the people in this country couldn't find work. It wasn't that they weren't willing. They couldn't find it. Mm-hmm. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, that is unbelievable. It's hard to imagine how we would make it through something like that.
That's exactly right. And so that generation who's all dying off now, when you grew up in that stuff, it's hard to find somebody alive who actually lived through the Depression, which essentially, it effectively ended during World War II. By that time, the economic machine was cranking so hard that if you needed, and unemployment went down to like 1%. I mean, you could find a job. If you could physically stand or kind of, you had a job making something for the war effort. So World War II essentially ended the Depression. But so now you got to have people who were born in the 20s to remember the 30s. Mm-hmm. And those people are now 100 years old or close to it.
Yep.
And so that's the last generation that really remembers, I would say, widespread struggle.
Yeah.
Rick, are you wishing a widespread struggle on us? No, I would much rather go learn the lessons without having to go through the pain. Well, wear your safety goggles. Well, why? Well, because it could put your eye out. Mm-hmm. Do I have to lose an eye in order to get that lesson, or can I just be wise enough to go, no, that actually makes sense. It's a $4 pair of goggles. Just put them on if you're going to be messing around with hammers and saws, and Mm-hmm. Do I have to lose an eye? Or can I just be common sense? Can I have the common sense enough? So you asked me to be on the podcast, and you said you were interested about China's influence. Listen, China's smart. China is smart, and China understands there's two weaknesses that we have. There's many we have in America, but our leading two weaknesses, and they are our leading two weaknesses. Make no mistake about it. One is greed, and the other one is, and that's universal. That is not an American thing. and that's throughout history. But our wokeness, and by wokeness, I'm gonna latch into that and say that the wokeness includes being politically correct. We are terrified of offending people.
Mm-hmm.
We're terrified of it. Now, that's defending the right person. We don't mind offending someone,
That's a good point. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
But we're terrified of that. Well, the Chinese are not stupid. They're brilliant people in this, and they know that that's one of our Achilles heels. And they're going to use that to their advantage. And if I were them, I would do the same thing. Where's the soft underbelly? And I'm going to exploit it like crazy. Greed and wokeness. Greed and this insatiable appetite to make sure that we don't look like we're going to offend someone. They don't care. I had a friend of mine that lived in China for 12 years. She's fluent. She said, you have no idea what it's like in China. She said, it's the most amazing thing. All the people in China, they look Chinese. I said, okay. She goes, well, wait a second. Because let that wash over you for a minute. They don't have the diversity that we have. You go to China, they're all Chinese. She goes, if you don't believe me, this was a good one. She goes, look at the Olympic ceremonies. Anytime they're doing the Olympic ceremonies where you come in, look at any country in general, and that population is going to look reflective of, quote unquote, what we think that population would look like. But then you see America, and it's everything.
Yep.
Right? So that's an experiment we have as America to deal with issues that a lot of other countries don't, and we have to on a scale that other countries don't. So if you are a minority in another country, well, you might be 1% of the population. Well, here a minority can be a larger group, and I don't just mean your race. I mean whatever minority means. You got to figure that out. But a minority in this country could be 38%. And that's 38% of a big number. There's 350 million people in this country.
And yet you have China spreading the word over here that we have such issues with diversity.
Sure.
While at the same time, they have, 1% or less, and they're doing crazy things. And so Joe Rogan had someone, he's the biggest platform in the world right now. I don't know if you knew that. His podcast
is insane. His numbers are ridiculous.
It's the biggest communication thing out there.
Almost as big as
yeah, almost as big as mine. Well, what's interesting about that, I think, is that I do see that as like a glimmer of hope in terms of free speech, and sort of if we can't trust news organizations anymore, which I think most reasonable people that are paying attention would say they've just lied too much at this point. It's clear that they are pushing a narrative,
right?
And so we can't really trust them. Or at least for people that are paying attention, I think there's probably plenty of people that are still plugged into that and they're just believing whatever it said. But if you can have things through the internet like a podcast,
right,
and some of them one of them turns into being the biggest in the world, the biggest platform in the world, it's not going to stop with just one. You know what I mean? And that can be a way to get word out, truth out, not pushing a narrative, and sort of combat against kind of a top-down media that seems like it's pushing a narrative. So that's a glimmer of hope. But what was I saying? Oh, I was saying that he had someone on recently who investigated the human slavery going on in the cobalt mining.
Yes.
And my phone's battery has cobalt in it, so does my car battery.
Sure.
And apparently there's no such thing as clean cobalt. It's all mined through basically slavery. And he was saying that we think slavery is a thing of the past.
Right. It's not.
It's not. There's more slavery happening now than ever in human history.
That's correct.
And 15 of the 19 mining companies in the Congo right now mining for cobalt do you want to guess who owns them? China.
Right.
So, and we know with the Uyghurs what they're doing over there. I mean, first of all,
they don't care.
Sorry, they don't care. And we don't even know half of what's going on. So they're sitting on top of all of that, locking people in apartments for COVID, and the apartment catches on fire and they burn to death. It's crazy.
Right.
So that's what's happening over there, but they keep all that hush hush.
Sure.
And they like to make a big deal about our lack of fairness and equity and diversity, etc. So it's
Got you.
It's a double standard at best, and at worst, it's actually pretty brilliant.
Here's your headline right here. This is China calling TikTok digital fentanyl is hypocritical because the U.S. has illegal marijuana. This is a statement.
Say that again.
It's a statement that China put out. It says calling TikTok "quote unquote" digital fentanyl is hypocritical because the U.S. has legal marijuana.
Oh my goodness! Well, do you know that fentanyl right now is the biggest killer in ages 18 to 45?
Yeah.
And do you know where fentanyl is made?
Sure.
China.
It's
It's crazy.
Okay.
It is crazy.
Okay, so
no one's talking about it. And you talk about like offending the right people. I mean,
Right.
surely you've seen that John Cena video where he is tripping over
Yes, he
himself.
is.
I'm so
Yes.
sorry. Please forgive me when he said something about Taiwan.
right. So that goes back to the second thing. What did I say? What did I say that the two problems, the biggest issues in America were? One was wokeism or political correctness. What was the other one?
Greed.
Greed. And that's what falls into greed. Follow the money.
Yeah.
When I was on the podcast last, we talked about a book called Factory Man. It was the furniture, the Bass Company, right?
I remember.
And again, the first 100 pages, whatever, but the book gets really good. So this is about the furniture industry, and all these people decided to go have their furniture made in China, and I won't relive it again on this podcast, but basically the furniture industry as a whole, and you have to understand North Carolina was like a Silicon Valley of furniture making, not only just in this country, but they exported it all over the world because they had the resources, the actual natural resources, the wood, the labor, the know-how, 100 years of knowledge. They started making all this furniture and everything, and then they found out they could make it in China for a fraction of what they could make it here, import it back to the U.S., sell it to their distributors, get rid of their factories, and make a ton of money. Okay, so one company is shuttered, but the owner gets to make more money than they've ever made in their lives. Okay, that's fine, whatever. Okay, you have the right to do
Right,
that.
because your margins go up a little bit.
That's
because
right.
of outsource. Yep.
So then the Chinese get smart. Again, they're smart people. They don't care about you. They care about them. And so they don't care who buys the furniture. So they cut you out, go straight to your dealers. And then all of a sudden you're like,
Sure.
wait a minute. No. You did this. When you put the means of production in their hands, and again, like I said last time, the part of that means of productions is, okay, we're going to do this. So you're going to get a massive, because these cats play the long game, man.
Exactly.
They play the long game.
They have time.
They have time, and they understand it. They understand that greed, and they understand that wokeness are our Achilles heel. They're going to exploit it every single time. If you and I were in a jiu-jitsu a tournament, and I knew that you were weak on your right side, I'm going to exploit that so many times. I'm just going to keep going back. If you and I are at the table playing cards together, and you've got a tell, and every time that you have a full house, or every time you've got a winning hand, you've got this tell. I'm not going to let you know that I know you have a tell. I'm going to exploit the crap out of that thing, and I'm going to beat you into submission. And you're going to wonder, how did he do it? If you're a pitcher, a lot of pitchers on the mounds, they have to work on not having a particular kind of tell before they throw a particular kind of ball. And there's been many situations in history where the batter knew that, and they never told anybody. And they were like, why do you always dominate against that pitcher? Well, it's because I know that every time he's going to throw a curveball, he puts his tongue out to the left, and he doesn't even know it. I just saw a thing that Andre Agassi played against. Oh goodness, who did he play against? I think it was Boris Becker or somebody like that. Andre Agassi was a tennis player for you youngsters, and there was one opponent that he used to play against, and he would beat him all the time, and the guy couldn't figure it out. And he always knew if he was going to serve left, he would put his tongue out to the left side. If he was going to start, and he never knew he did that. And he didn't tell him until after he retired that that's how he did it. He's like, oh my God, like you dominated me that bad because I had a tell. Okay, well, Americans, we have a tell, wokeism and greed. And the Chinese know this. And so you cut the furniture guy out, you go sell to the dealers. And okay, so now what happens is thousands of people lost their jobs. And it wasn't people that just made the furniture. It was all the ancillary businesses that fed that. So the loggers and all that stuff. Okay. Well, the Chinese said, look, if you're going to put your plant here, you got to teach us what you know. They were more interested in that than they were the economic windfall that comes from making dressers,
Right.
They wanted the knowledge.
That's a very key point.
Because it was.
Would you not agree?
Absolutely.
People skip over this point a lot because they do this with everything.
Right. So all right. Now let's take that to something more high tech. Oh, I don't know. Let's say chips, microchips. Processors. Okay. Well, so you have the ability to have a factory here in America. Well, let's say that it cost you $100 to make a chip. You can make the same chip for $15 in China. Well, I don't have to be an idiot. I can do basic math. That makes more sense. Mm-hmm. Well, the question is, does that become greedy to go over there? Or does that make good economic sense? And that is a legitimate debate we can have. Mm-hmm. But you can't just look at the bottom line. You've got to look at all these other factors. All right. So then that's okay, well, how does that work? Well, so we go over to China. Well, again, what are they interested in? They don't care about the economic windfall of making the chips. They want the knowledge. Mm-hmm. And so all of this intellectual property that we have here, all this inventiveness and this innovation that we have, that's what they're after. Mm-hmm. All right. It's one of the reasons why when we would have spy planes, we would make sure that there was some kind of a kill switch or that would blow the thing up or a destruct button or whatever. It was a big deal when the YouTube spy plane went down and Gary Powers in the 60s over Russia. We didn't want them to get the plane. In World War II, we had a sight system in our planes that was just legendary. It's one of the things that helped us win the war. And one of our biggest fears was that the Germans would get a hold of it. Mm-hmm. Right. And so if they get a hold of your secrets, quote, well, that's what the Chinese have been smart enough to say, look, these folks are greedy. I'm going to exploit that. We'll give them all the money they want. We'll take care. They're going to make a ton of money. What we're going to do is we're going to do that first. Then we're going to gain all the knowledge that they've spent the last whatever years, mm-hmm. 100, 10, 20, whatever. But we're going to gain that in 6 months. Mm-hmm. And now that we understand the means of production, we don't give a crap about them.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter to us at all. We now know how to do the thing.
Yeah.
So we don't need you anymore.
Yeah. And that's happened just over and over again. And you mentioned TikTok. Mm-hmm. I think this is old news now. But see, TikTok, all right, if you're in China, you don't get the same thing on TikTok that Americans do.
Of course.
So first of all, TikTok is a Chinese company.
That is correct.
Second of all, it is the most popular social media platform in America now, I think. I think 1 in 3 people now have TikTok. I think it's somewhere, maybe you could check Colby, but I want to say somewhere around 75 to 120 million Americans have TikTok. The number is crazy high. It's a Chinese company, and they have absolutely used it to spy. So we know that's happening.
They've told us.
Yeah, it's not
It's in their
it's not
terms and conditions.
Well, yeah, but I agree with that. But it's one thing to have in terms of conditions, and it's another thing to realize they're actually doing it. But again, okay, that doesn't make much sense because if it's in their terms and conditions, why wouldn't they do it? There's just still something about terms and conditions, blah, 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 press agree.
Right.
Surely they're not going to do it, right? You give people the benefit of the doubt. Well, they're doing it. But I think the more sinister thing is that the fact that I think it shows the power of the long play and of subtlety and of getting in people's psyche because China does not allow what comes across our TikTok in America, which is cute videos, funny videos, dancing, wasting time videos, all of this, whatever, cutesy type dumb stuff that makes your mind dumber. You get addicted to it. They don't even allow that in China. It's all like science experiments and educational and patriotic sort of nationalist stuff. And I'm sure it's also fascinating and intriguing and educational. Like they wouldn't just have boring stuff or no one would be on it. I'm sure it's still, it captures your attention.
Sure.
But it's different stuff.
Right.
Like that alone to me, when you think about that,
right.
Like when you really think about that, like we're allowing something in this country that they are not allowing in their own country, and they are the country that owns it.
The movie Social Dilemma. I don't know if you've ever seen that or not.
I have seen it.
Oh, it's incredible.
It is incredible.
And so these are people that they interviewed in this movie. They weren't some level 4 engineer in a cubicle pounding out code. These were people that created things, like the guy that created scrolling. Like this is the dude that he invented scrolling that we do Like this was the guy, right?
Yeah, who would have ever thought?
Right. And all of these people are like, are you kidding me? I don't have that stuff on my kids. Oh, no, that my kids don't mess with that. My kids,
the people that work there, right?
The people that worked there.
That's right.
Worked
That's right.
past tense.
Yes.
The people that invented the stuff, the like button and all that. They listen. These were big, heavy hitters in that world that literally helped create some of that monstrosity.
Yep.
So, like for me, I don't have social media on my phone. The only one I have is LinkedIn, and that is for business purposes and kind of an archive for some of my thoughts and things. It's a good place for me to put that.
It's a good way to connect with, contact people. I noticed LinkedIn.
It is, but that's what I use it for. And it's a running joke in my family. I love memes. I love memes so much, and it's because of that I don't have Instagram. I can't put Instagram on my phone just because I like memes so much.
Ah, okay.
So
you're
I know
aware of
that's
your weakness, and
it's a weakness of mine.
Okay.
I would spend 45 minutes just boom. I'd look up, and 45 minutes later, I'm like, I can't.
Yep.
So I had to get that out. When I sold peaches, we did a lot of our peach business, advertising and social media was an enormous part of our company. And so I needed to be on there just to be aware if we made an announcement or something. I was, going around the country selling fruit, and, I wasn't necessarily back home at the Nashville base. And so it's like if something happened, I needed to be aware of what was going on, what things were saying, what the hub was. So I would install it right before I left for tour. And then I would take it back off my phone as soon as I got done with tour.
Wow.
And I'm telling you, in that 6 to 9 week period, I would find myself just the amount of time I was on there daily for content that had nothing to do with peaches. I mean, it was insane. And so if I have discipline and I'm that bad, what is somebody who's unfettered, a 16-year-old kid that's unfettered with no controls, with no mom or dad that's like, hey, listen, you need to lay back. And so that's why. So my kids, we don't do that. There's no social media. Now the older ones, they're older. I can't.
Right.
I mean, you're
not going to tell your 28-year-old
I'm
you
not.
can't be on social media.
Right. But like my 15-year-old, we got her a watch called Gab. You ever heard of this?
we have one.
Okay,
Lincoln has one.
Yeah, we got a Gab.
Yeah.
They're fantastic.
Yeah, they are.
And it's like, okay, this is the deal. So she's got
You can call and text.
That's right. But you can only call and text the people who are on there.
Okay.
Because hers
is that true?
Yes, hers are.
Okay.
So if you don't have my daughter's phone number,
that.
you're not actually listed as one of the 20 on my daughter's phone. So if you tried to call her, you can't get through.
Okay, I guess I didn't know that about Gab.
That's right.
Okay.
It's predetermined people. And so, Uncle so-and-so's on there and Aunt so-and-so and, 2 or 3 family friends who we know and love and trust implicitly, they're on there. Mm-hmm. And the only reason that she needs to contact them or vice versa is for emergency purposes. Mm-hmm. None of this emoji crap and all this. This is a communication device for when you are where you need to be and you need to communicate. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't have all that stuff as a training mechanism. And social media is very similar to alcohol and tobacco. And there's a lot of studies that prove this. If you can be older, the statistics of people who start drinking, if they didn't drink before 25, it's infinitesimal. It's very, very tiny. The people that start smoking, I mean, how many people that pick up smoking after 25 years old? It's
few.
It's very few.
Yeah.
And so social media is the same way. There's a developmental part of your pre-cortex and all this stuff. I'm not a neuroscientist. I only play one on TV. But there's parts of developments in your brain that at 25 is pretty much developed. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of things that you need to try to avoid before that age. And social media is one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I even heard, I was just listening to Andrew Huberman's podcast recently on alcohol, and he was saying, even if you can not be drinking at all or much at all until even like the age was so young, it was like 19 or 20.
Yeah.
Like if you're not drinking at all or much at all by 19 or 20, the chances of you becoming an alcoholic are almost zero.
That's right.
Which to me was shocking, because what that's saying is most of the alcoholics are drinking a significant amount before 19 or 20.
Correct.
Which is really young to be drinking alcohol.
So apply that to social media. It's the same thing.
Exactly.
These apps are specifically designed to keep us addicted.
Yes.
Time on the and again, it goes back to I said greed and wokeism. Okay, follow the money. So greed. And I'm not saying being wealthy is a bad thing. I love wealth. Let's go.
Being wealthy is different than greed, isn't it?
It is different than that. And so if I have a product that I know is bad for someone, and I know it's bad for somebody, but I'm still going to make money off of it, okay. I had a time years ago, I had to work at a place. I was in between jobs. It was a rough patch in our lives in terms of financial. I'd lost a good job. And it was during the economic downturn. And I had a job for just 3 months at H.H. Gregg. My dad saw this ad in the paper. It said, 100% commission salesman can make great money. And he says to me, you're a really good salesman. Because I think you could just work there through the holidays and probably, I know you're trying to do what you can to support your family, but I think you could do well. Within the first week, I was the number one salesman at H.H. Gregg.
Oh, yeah.
All the stores in Middle Tennessee. I was. But I kept getting in trouble every week. And here's why I kept getting in trouble. Part of your job there was you had to open up or take 3 new credit card applications every day, every shift you worked. 3 new credit card applications. It was part of your job there.
Because that was the money behind the money. That was the secondary income stream.
And you know me. You know how I feel about debt. You know how I feel about especially credit card debt. I don't have any. Don't believe in it. I don't do debt at all of any kind. I don't do debt. None. 0. And so here I am. This guy. I had to go with my ethics. Like I couldn't do it. I would have this couple in there, and they were talking about how get a TV. We could pay the rent next week, and I just want to grab him by the hand in a polite, like a sweet manner and say, hey, dude, get out of here. Like, leave. You don't need to be in here buying a TV. You sure as heck don't need to be doing it on a credit card at 28% interest. Please go. And so my manager would call me over. Rick, you're still killing it. Your sales are up more than anybody else. But, dude, you've got to get some credit card apps. And I looked at him right in the people and I said, John, if you need to fire me, fire me. But I want to be real clear on this. I will not take credit card apps. So you have to decide as a manager, you will accept the fact that I treat the company well, the customers well, and sell more than anybody else.
Yep.
And will not take credit card apps, or you've got to determine if the 3 credit card apps a day is worth firing me over. Yes. But I need you to make your decision.
Yeah. Yeah. What was the decision?
He left me alone.
Oh, did he really?
Well, yeah. I would outsell 3 or 4 salesmen a day.
Sure.
He was smart enough to at least go, okay.
Yep.
He said, just don't tell anybody about it. I said, great.
Yep.
Keep it between me, but I'm not going to do it. So that's an example of having a line and saying, I won't go past this. And I had kids to feed, man.
So on that line, which, all right, so what do you have here, Colby?
Yeah, China sees it, and they're limiting their teens.
China moves to limit social media, gaming as teens get more addicted and mental health is impacted. Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah. So they see it, and they can actually do that type of thing and not get in trouble for it. Where in America, it's a little bit different, which is one of the things we like about this country.
That's right.
To your point on having lines that you don't cross, a lot of this country's fat now. We're obese. Obese is cool.
Sure.
It's fine. I saw Sagar with Breaking Points on YouTube, an independent news station that I started following the last couple of years. He posted on Instagram that now there was some headline, which, headlines are just one of those things. Big whoop-de-doo. It's someone's opinion, right?
Sure.
Like if you met this person in the street and they said to you, hey, did you know that exercise has a history of white supremacy? You'd be like, shut up, dude. Right. I don't care. But when it becomes a headline, that was still written by one person.
Sure.
But all of a sudden, it's like, oh, it's a headline. They have a platform. This must, that was literally the headline.
Yeah.
Exercise, you saw it?
Yeah.
So I didn't even read it. I don't care.
I didn't
Whatever. I don't care what. I don't care. It feels good to be fit, and you can't be fit unless you move your body and you eat decent.
But that goes back to that common sense we talked about.
Well, yeah, it does. But on this, having some amount of decency and lines and ethics and morals, which I don't know, maybe that's overstating it, but here's what I'm getting at is the country's fat, obese, unfit. And then you have this, who is that I don't know a lot about soccer, but one of the best well-known soccer players, really good looking dude. I think his name is David Beckham. And one of the Manning brothers, I forget which, were in a Frito-Lay chips commercial.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was it's the type of Frito-Lay that's like the cheapest of the cheap. It looks like those chips are made out of possibly cardboard. And they were each eating a bag of Frito-Lays. in this commercial and maybe watching something on sports on TV. And I don't know why this never once occurred to me, but I'm thinking, I know enough about those two dudes. I'm pretty sure they never eat Frito-Lay chips. And if they do, it's on a commercial. And yet here they are normalizing it. Like these guys are eating Frito-Lay chips. You can't be David Beckham and stuff your face with Frito-Lay chips. It just doesn't work.
Right.
Those guys can do whatever they want to do. I'm not trying to point a finger at them. I'm sure they made great money on that commercial. I would have liked to think, though, that they have made enough of money from other things that they wouldn't really need to do that. Like when we put really successful people that are really fit on TV and videotape them stuffing their mouth with Frito-Lay chips, that has an impact on society.
Sure.
People can start to assume, because a lot of people, I don't think, know enough that, you can't expect to be in a good, healthy physical condition and stuff your face with Frito-Lay chips. It's not how it works.
Right.
So it's almost like an alternate reality, where these really fit, successful, professional athletes are eating Frito-Lay chips. They don't do that habitually in real life. So I just thought of that when it comes to like having some lines. And like I would the truth is, if Frito-Lay called me and said, man, I'm going to pay you $1 billion to eat chips, I'm going to videotape you, I'd probably do that. I might do that. I would like to think I wouldn't, though, if the number is somewhat reasonable. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you film me sitting in the sauna. Or let's figure something out where it's like, if this succeeds, it's good for society. Right? So on, social media, I wanted to mention this, is I was listening to Jonathan Haidt, who wrote The Coddling of the American Mind. I think he co-wrote it with someone, on Tim Ferriss's podcast recently. And Jonathan Haidt was saying, he changed his mind on video games a little bit, but not social media. He had a 6th grader, which I have a 7th grader, so I was paying attention. He had a 6th grader. He didn't want him playing video games at all. And in 6th grade, this guy got a little bit left behind from his buddies because all his buddies were on Fortnite. And then he was reading some stuff that actually showed that Fortnite or video games can actually be beneficial to some degree if it's limited with young males, young boys. And so in 7th grade, he let them have Fortnite. He limited the use. And but he would not allow them on social media. Right. And I have been paying attention to that. We let our boys play Fortnite, but it's very restricted, once a week on Friday nights. And I do not plan. I want to keep them off of social media as long as possible, because I do think you mentioned the alcohol and tobacco thing. Right. I mean, you could throw the Chinese mentioned marijuana. Sure. Same thing. If you can wait until 25, let that brain develop before you start doing much or any of that, it's much better.
Well, it's like anything else. Moderation. It speaks to moderation of okay, look, do I like Oreos? Yeah. Are they garbage? Sure. So, well, then what's the key? Well, don't eat them all day.
Exactly.
Have an Oreo occasionally.
I love Oreos too. I love those Frito-Lay chips every so often.
I do too. The key is that moderation. Whatever your thoughts are on drinking. Okay, if you want a glass of wine occasionally, all right, have a glass of wine occasionally if that's your thing. Oh goodness, I have a beer during the Super Bowl. Okay, you're not going to go to hell and you're not going to become an alcoholic. Yep. The thing is it's that moderation. And that's what we lack on some things. Oh yeah. And we have too much of on things that we don't need moderation.
That is true. Yeah. Look, I have massive struggle with moderation. Yeah. I'm not the moderation guy. Yeah. Like no, I'm not. I need to build in habits and self roles on myself where I would just. Yeah, I
call that forced discipline is what I call
exactly.
it.
Exactly.
Yes. So the IRS figured this out. The IRS are brilliant, and I mean that tongue in cheek. So they figured out, if we'll take your taxes out of your check before you get your money, A, we will always get our money, and B, we won't have a riot in Washington, D.C. when you get your tax bill on April the 15th.
Isn't that something?
That's forced discipline. So you take a 401k. Well, you take a person that's not a saver by nature, but they have X amount of dollars or percentage of their income diverted to a 401k. Well, that person, in spite of their natural tendencies, can build some serious wealth. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I recommend to people, anytime you get paid, I don't care how you get paid, what kind of money you make, what kind of job you have, your income should always go into a savings account first, never your checking. Your checking should be an operative account that you just do once. So you should do one transfer a month from your savings to your checking. And that's where you operate from. Mm-hmm. So let's say that you make $5,000 a month and you only need $3,000 to live off of. Well, if it goes in your checking, if you're like normal human beings, you're going to spend it. You put it in your savings, all right? And then you say, well, I need $3,000 a month. So because you actually do a budget. How wild is that? I know it doesn't
that's crazy.
apply to Washington, D.C., but anyway. So you do an actual budget, and you stick with it, by the way. And so then you say, well, I need $3,251 this month. So you transfer that from your savings to your checking. Well, what's left is $1,800. And if you have some discipline, you look up and you're a year down the road, and even though you didn't make a lot of money, because $5,000 a month is only $60,000, but you look up and all of a sudden you got $20,000 in your.
That's very interesting. So I've actually, you're the first person that said you recommend actually putting the income into your savings account.
Always
and
your savings.
Pulling out what you need. That's fascinating. I want to think about that a little bit more.
You transfer once a month. I had a friend of mine years ago that made good money. He made $250 a year, and that's good money. Mm-hmm. It's not great, but it's good money. Mm-hmm. And he didn't have any consumer debt at all, other than his home. He had no consumer debt, but he could never get ahead. What in the heck are we doing? Mm-hmm. I go, let me ask you a question. So your checks go to your checking account, don't they? Yes. How'd you know that? I said, well, let me ask you another question. You don't do anything with cash, do you? You use your debit cards for everything. Yeah. So do you want me to dig through your last 90 days of your balances and stuff and your spending to tell you where your money's going? Would you do that for me? Oh, of course I will. So he printed off his statements, and I just said, well, look, this much is going to food, this much is going out to eat, clothing, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the problem is this: you're making good money, and you're not adding debt, and that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. You should be commended. But the problem is you're not saving anything, and you have a huge income for somebody that lives in Tennessee. I said, if you'll change one or two small things. So number one, you're going to have it all go to your savings account, and then you're going to do an actual budget. I know it's painful, but you're going to do it. And then you're going to transfer that money once a month. So he came back to me after 1 year doing this. He goes, dude, we have $80,000 in our savings account.
Wow.
I said, you started this year, you didn't have any. You had like $1,300.
Huh.
I said,
cool.
we have $80,000 in our savings account. I said, congratulations. Yeah. Keep doing it.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Now, what do I do with the $80,000? That's another conversation for another day.
Right.
But the point is, so what you were talking about is forced discipline. Mm-hmm. You've got things in your life that you know you have certain tendencies. Mm-hmm. My pastor talked about this a lot, and I don't know if I talked about this last time we were on the podcast, but porn on your phone. You know, he said when we were younger, I'm 48 years old, and my friend is he's my pastor, former pastor, and dear friend. I think he's 3 or 4 years older than me, so he's early 50s. He said, listen, when we were kids, if we wanted to look at pornography of any kind, he goes, there were all these checks and balances in place. So let's say you wanted to get a magazine. All right. Well, you either had to have someone in your family that was older that had one. Let's assume that wasn't the case, and you just wanted to go buy a dirty mag, right? Mm-hmm. Well, then you had to go to a place that sold it. They were always on the top, and they were wrapped in these packages that had them blacked out. So everyone, yeah. So like if you want to buy a Playboy, the Playboys were with the magazines, but they were on the top, and then they were in a cellophane wrapper that had this gigantic black thing across the front that said Playboy. You couldn't see the cover.
You think that was regulated? Probably was. Huh?
I don't know. It just made sense, though. So if I wanted to buy that Playboy, well, number one, I had to go through the potential embarrassment of somebody catching me. And number two, I had to physically take it off the shelf and then put it up there, which, again, there's layers of potential embarrassment. But then the dude knew what I was buying. He could say, hey, dude, you got to be 18 to buy this. I'm going to need to see some ID. Mm-hmm. All right. So there was layers. If you wanted to see a porno, okay, well, there were no streaming services or anything. So there were checks and balances. You had to go to the video store. Then there was the creepy little room in the back with all the video cameras in it, right? So number one, you had to be old enough to get in there. That was a check and balance, right? And number two, if you were old enough to go in there, you had to go through the embarrassment of somebody possibly catching you. Mm-hmm. And number three, the videos were in a different color box. So like if all the boxes for the videos were black, well, the dirty movies were in, like, let's say orange ones. So when you left there, right?
Yeah.
See what I'm saying? So there was just built-in layers of accountability, and it didn't stop people from accessing pornography. It just made it a lot more difficult. Mm-hmm. Well, now all you need is a phone.
Yep.
You need a phone, and that's it. You're off to the races.
Yep.
And so what it did was it took away all these walls of accountability that we had. And you got people like, and I'm going to go back to China. China understands those type of things with TikTok and those kind of things. They understand it. So they take away that accountability. So the accountability that they want in their own country, because they're not stupid, They want to make sure that we don't have that accountability in this country. And I'm not necessarily talking about rules. You know me. I question authority. I'm a very interesting person in that I've got all these conflicting ideas. I question authority always. But then there's times when we need to rally together and all work together. Somebody's got to lead that effort. And so then you look at that, and I like free markets, but I also believe that people are greedy. And so there needs to be some checks and balances. I can't stand regulations, but there needs to be some regulations because left to our own devices, we will run amok, and that greed will take over. And so I'm a weird person how I fall. It's funny. I was out in California several years ago, and my wife's aunt is a true die-in-the-wool California liberal, a leftist. That's just she. And I think she's that way because she subscribes to the CNN, left-leaning publications, and she's always watching that stuff. And we were out there at one of the national parks or something, and she was showing us something that was real pretty. And she says, "Oh, don't you just love that this is here? I mean, it's a national park." And she looks at me, knowing that I'm a conservative. And she says, "You probably hate that, don't you?" And so I looked at her like you just looked at me. I kind of furrowed my eyebrow. I go, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "Well, you know this, that we're that the country owns this, and it's not in some private man's hands." I said, "I think it's fantastic that the country preserved this, and I love that my tax dollars are going to preserve this. That's something I don't mind my tax dollars going to." And she looked at me like I punched her in the face. She was so shocked. She was like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm glad that an individual developer doesn't own the Grand Canyon."
Right.
Because there would be condos up on the rim. I don't want that. I want to take my family to see these national treasures that are wonderful. My problem is that when you get into things like water rights and those type of things, which if you haven't followed that, that's a big deal. There were some Obama-era water rights that he pushed through and his EPA Nazis pushed through, and they are EPA Nazis, pushed through, that Trump was able to undo, and very quietly, Biden just let them revert. So you're going to see a big mess with that. So water rights is a huge deal.
When you say, what are you, just explain what you just said.
Well,
what are you talking about?
So what is defined as a waterway and a water right? So that definition has been changed again.
Okay, but are you saying at one point, you owned a ranch in Montana and you owned the river going through it, but then Obama said, actually, it's your property, but because this is a river, the government owns the river?
That's precisely correct. And the government had control.
And then Trump said, no, it's your river.
Went back to the way it was beforehand.
And Biden said, no, it's water, and it goes through your property.
It's insane. You got to do some reading on that. It's crazy.
Okay.
So much so, it's the runoff of your gutters can be regulated now by the federal government.
Well, a good place to start in terms of water is these big farms that are just spraying chemicals all over everything. Apparently, it creates ridiculous runoff.
Right.
Okay, I want to go back to the 18-year-old and the 20 and 21-year-olds founders.
Okay.
Who was the first guy you said? James Madison?
Yeah, James Madison was 18.
Why is that name so familiar? He wrote some important stuff, right? I'm sorry, I just revealed my ignorance right now.
Oh, that's okay.
What did he write?
Well, James Madison was responsible for writing the Constitution of the United States.
Well, shit. Okay. Is that true? He was like the primary guy writing it, or what?
Yeah. So I got, a few years ago, with my family, it was really cool. We got to stand in the room where he wrote it. So he was holed up for about 6 to 9 months.
So
he was. And he had, first of all, he was the smallest president we ever had. He was 5'4", but he was one of the wittiest and most intelligent. So he had this great. Somebody said something one day about his height, right? He goes, yes. I feel like a dime in a room of pennies. Like that's this guy's wit, right?
Nice one.
Right? Like he's that smart. So Madison was brilliant, and Madison had studied. He was a classically trained academic. Like he understood a lot of classical education that we no longer have. That stuff is being lost like crazy. Again, even though we're drowning in information. And so Madison, he studied and he knew he knew his history. And what he looked at is he started studying different governments and what had worked, what had worked well, what didn't work, why empires fell. And he kept cobbling together, and between him and Adams and Jefferson, they helped cobble together, and Monroe had a little bit to do with it, but they cobbled together what would become the Constitution. And then it went through some iterations. It had to. But the idea of a representative republic, that was this guy. We are not a democracy, and that people don't understand democracy in the pure nature is mob rule. So people get so frustrated that we don't have like people want our presidential elections to be popular vote. Mm-hmm. You cannot imagine the insanity that would be. These guys were so brilliant. They were able to peer into the future hundreds of years because they didn't know exactly what would take place. And so they left the ability to change things and move things around. But they also knew that mob rule was very, very bad. They knew that. And that is exactly what a popular vote for electing a president is. It is mob rule. You don't want that. So what the Electoral College is we have 50 individual elections for the president of the United States. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. And then you get electoral votes based on the population of your state. Mm-hmm. So you got states like California who are losing people. For the first time ever, they lost electoral votes.
So they lost enough people that they actually lost electoral votes?
That's right.
Votes?
People are fleeing there, yeah. Illinois and New York in droves.
If you think about it, it's kind of a smart little check and balance.
That's exactly what it is.
And wasn't James Madison a pluralist also, not a populist?
That's correct.
Is that okay? And but I guess what I wanted to get back to with how young these guys were. First of all, it is interesting that they were all dudes, and that was probably somewhat a product of the environment back then, right? The rules are a little different.
Yeah, but they had women behind them, though. Dolly Madison was incredible.
But also, these are some things that now in 2022 it gets weird to talk about, but men tend to be naturally more open to adversity.
Sure.
Is that okay to say?
That's perfectly fine.
So it's not totally lost on me like these dudes were dudes.
Right.
This is sort of how some of the natural ways that were made and inclinations and so forth. But it's really, really remarkable to me, the age.
Yeah.
The age is really remarkable to me. Maybe partly because, I grew up in an environment that later I chose to not exactly stay within in all areas. And I think one of the things that I heard a lot when I was 18, 21, 25 was, is essentially you're not old enough to, once you're older, you understand.
Right.
And the same thing could have been said to these guys. I mean, good grief, they're 21 years old.
Quite possibly.
But they didn't let the fact that they weren't, 47, 58, 63 deter them from taking action. And I guess, I don't know, maybe this is a stretch, maybe it's not, but it's also interesting to me that it apparently took, whether it actually took it or it just so happened, doesn't matter. He was really, really young men. I mean, that is really, really young to get us this freedom.
Yes.
And that demographic, would we all not agree that very demographic today is what's being most harped on, belittled, undermined,
of course,
cast aside? I mean, I understand I'm a white male, 38 years old, and these are words that are coming out of my mouth.
I don't make you wrong.
I don't think it makes me wrong. And this is not about me. It's just an observation. Sure. When I look at culture and media, the things that are said and how they're said, there really is, it does seem to me, it appears to me that there's some sort of backlash against the masculine today for whatever reason. And it makes me a little curious. It makes me a little curious. It does make me a little curious because I know like, some people would say, well, it might be part of a bigger picture, a grand scheme, because if you can sort of set aside the younger males who tend to value freedom and will fight and will, give their life for a cause that they believe in, if you can belittle them, undermine them, set them aside, then you can have the population do what you want the population to do.
Might that be one of the reasons why we can't even fulfill our recruitment numbers for the military?
Most people are too fat now to join the military.
How about that?
I mean, we're not even fit to fight.
Right.
Do you have just to wrap up with the age of these founders then, do you think that was, I guess I'm wondering if you think that was just so happened,
No,
or if it's what it took.
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually think that we also have changed our views on age as well. And so the youngest one on that list I just read was James Massey, was 18 years old. I mean, these cats were married by that point, and they were having families at that point. Vanderbilt, Cornelius Vanderbilt, Commodore, the Vanderbilt, the Commodores, that's after him. And he was the one that started the Vanderbilt Empire. He was 11 years old when he started a ferry service going across from Staten Island to Manhattan. He was 11. He wasn't the assistant on a ferry service. He wasn't helping someone. He freaking started a ferry service at 11. We won't let our kids check the mail at 11.
Whoa.
And this guy was running a ferry service, taking people back and forth across a very dangerous harbor, an unregulated harbor at that time, at 11. It's interesting that he became the richest man in the world, too. Isn't that odd? And so we have to allow our kids to make mistakes. We've got to stop hovering over them all the time. They're going to break an arm occasionally, and we don't want them to, but we got to be so afraid. We got to remove all these barriers that we put around our kids, and we hover. Can you believe he got married? He was only 20. Oh my gosh, he got married at 20. 20, okay, that's fine. He's going to be okay. She was 19. She got married. Goodness gracious. Well, she would have been an old hag 150, 200 years ago.
Yeah, that's fine.
Had she not been, right? Well, I'm not saying that that's necessarily wise, and you got to take into account the individual person. But this stuff about waiting till you're 33 to get married just because you're waiting.
It's not necessary.
It's not necessary. And so you look at that, you look at the age of these people. They were allowed to be kids. It was no big deal for them to go explore and hunt and ride horseback and fish when they were 6. Not 16, 6. So they did encounter snakes, and they did encounter bobcats, and they did encounter things and cold, and sometimes things happen. Sometimes one of your friends got their foot stuck under a rock and drowned to death in the river. I'm not celebrating that, but trying to remove all of those potential hazards from our kids' lives have made them weak. They don't know how to fail. Our kids don't know how to fail, and then they get depressed. Well, my son's going through the smart one, the one with, I say the smart one, all kids are smart, but he thinks differently. The one with Minecraft, Jack. So Jack's he's done it right. This year alone, he's bought 2 cars. First one he bought, paid $3,000 cash for it, put $1,000 worth of brand new tires on it, took good care of it. 3 months later, the transmission completely went out. He was able to sell it for $1,500 for salvage. Beside himself. So what does he replace it with? A Toyota Camry. Can you get any better than that? The polar vortex happens a couple of weeks ago, cracks the head, now the engine's shot. He's like, Dad. Well, the dad part of me that wants to protect him wants to help the kid go get a car. And he's got money because he was taught the right way how to handle money and actually did it. I don't want him to feel that pain. But then the other side of me is like, boy, this is good for you.
He's learning.
You're learning.
Yeah. How old is he?
He's 19.
Okay.
This needs to hurt. Not that I want to hurt my kid, but you need to feel this. I think we've talked about it before. The little boy's watching the butterfly come out of the cocoon. Have you ever heard that story?
Yes.
Yep. And he wants to help it. He doesn't want it to feel pain, so he cuts the cocoon open. Butterfly falls to the ground, starts faltering, and he dies. What the boy didn't know is that the butterfly, when they come out of the cocoon, they push this liquid into their wings. That's what allows their wings to actually beat. If they don't go through the struggle, then they can't fly the way they're supposed to. And I'm not wishing pain on my kids. I'm not wishing struggle on my children, but they're going to have to do that. And when they do that thing where they drop their shoulders and go, you're going to be all right.
Yeah.
You're going to be fine.
Since you mentioned your kids, can you remind me the first name of your daughter that made that bison painting up there on the shelf far right?
That's Abigail.
Abigail.
Yeah.
That is incredible. Yeah. The last time Rick was on the podcast, afterwards, his daughter made that bison drawing and Rick gave it to me. Yeah. She's self-taught?
Self-taught. We had a friend of ours, art teacher, very, very talented art teacher. And she sat with Abby for a few times, and she came out and helped her with some stuff, watercolors and things like that. And so she pulled Bonnie aside. She says, hey, she can draw better than anything I can do. I can't help her drawing anymore.
Oh, that's cool.
Like she's passed anything I learned.
Whoa,
I have a college
really
degree in
cool.
this stuff. Like I can't.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. So part of me wishes that you would have said earlier in terms of empires rising and falling, that was more a thing of the past.
No.
And because of where society's at now in general, that will happen much less or maybe not even happen at all. But you say no.
No, it's going to continue to happen. History will repeat itself. Yeah.
So I guess then the obvious thing that stands out is that if that's true, is it conceivable to think that if the right things fall into place and continue to fall into place and we continue to go down the wrong path, eventually, this country is going to be no more in serious in a serious dilemma, which maybe some would say it already is. Like, if empires will continue to rise and fall, I mean, we're number one now, right? But China has their sights set on being number one.
Sure.
And if they continue to manipulate us in the ways that it seems like they are currently and have
the
been
world,
for a long
not
time,
just us and the world.
China
That's important.
manipulating us in the world
And
Okay,
the world.
Sure.
They don't just manipulate us.
Yep. So, so what are your thoughts on that then? If the wrong things happen, at some point we're not number one, and at some point after that we're not even.
There's a line in the movie, The Titanic. It's my favorite line in the movie, even though and I am an optimist, by the way. You know me. Like, you know, I'm one of the most optimistic people you probably ever met. Mm-hmm. But I also do have a big dose of realism in me. And I see things. And so it's like, I'm optimistic you're going to lose weight, but you've been fat for 20 years. Mm-hmm. So history's not on your side, right? Like that's, well, I'm optimistic that you're going to learn to save money and budget, but you're 58 and you still haven't figured out how to do it. So the realism in me says it's going to be tough, not impossible, but you're up against it. So there's a line in the movie, The Titanic, and Rose looks at the guy that built the ship, and she goes, "It can't sink." And he looks at her and he goes, "Rose, it's made of iron. I assure you, it can sink." Right? You say, well, what are you saying? How does that relate to what we're talking about? I assure you, if the right conditions are here, America can disappear. This idea of invincibility is insane. It's arrogant and it's dangerous. If you have the right conditions, yes, we would be a very hard foe to beat, either militarily, ideology. America is amazing. I fly the American flag outside my house. I'm a patriotic dude. I love this country. I think it's one of the reasons you probably want to have me on the podcast. I love this country. Mm-hmm. I've got a buddy of mine that retired as a sergeant major, 24 years, 11 tours of duty. He's got 8 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star, 4 letters of commendation, was nominated for another Silver Star, turned down his Purple Hearts, plural, been shot. The guy's just wicked smart, one of the smartest men I know, and I love him. Everybody, Uncle Brandon. I mean, he's a massive dude. You talk about a workout guy. I mean, we were doing dumbbells yesterday. He's got the 110s.
Nice.
To warm up with the 110s.
Nice.
I didn't have that. And but he's a beast, and he's just but this is a guy that came from nothing, an absentee, horrible father, a mother that's just trying to hold the world together with 4 little kids. My wife taught him how to march in the marching band. He was a freshman when we were seniors. Then he goes into the military and he finds structure and purpose, and he found a place where he could succeed. And I was looking at the picture when he went into the special forces. There was about 250 guys in that picture. And I looked at it and I said, I'm just curious, how many of those guys went to sergeant major? That's E9. You can't get any higher than that. That's as high as you can go. But how many of those guys went to, he says, goodness, that's a good question. And he's kind of looking at it and he's studying and he goes, I'm the only one. He goes, I've never thought about that before. And he was kind of embarrassed about it. He's very modest.
How many guys?
250 that
wow.
went into his special forces group. He was the only one that rose to the rank of sergeant major. And when he was explaining to me, he said, once you get above E7, he said it becomes about every little thing. You could potentially not get a promotion because your name badge, your ID badge was a week out of date. He said it was down to that level of activity. But seeing a guy like this do what he did in the service and the dedication and what his family went through, and 11 tours of duty, Kent, 11. I mean, some of the stuff that this guy saw and was part of is you can't imagine. And he loves his country. And to see people talk about this country the way they do and their lack of actions and the things they want to do to destroy this country, it angers people like him. It angers people like me because we love what it stands for. We love freedom. We don't just love freedom for our citizens, and that's a misconception. We don't just love freedom for our citizens. We love what it stands for in the country and in the world, on the world stage. When you have a country that is a beacon of freedom and First Amendment rights and the value of human life, it's changed the world. And so then you look at a country like China, they don't care. It's about playing the rules. If you and I are going to sit down at a chessboard and we're going to play chess, right? There is an established set of rules to play chess. True or false?
True.
And certainly if we enter into a tournament. So you and I could play Scrabble here, and you and I could agree at this table we're going to be allowed to flip through the dictionary before we submit a word. Well, that's cheating. No, it's not cheating if we agree that it's part of the deal, because we're not really great spellers, but you and I kind of like playing Scrabble. So, if we think goober is a word, we'll look through it and see if it's in the dictionary. And we'll say, okay, goober's a word. And then we'll turn the, but we've agreed on that, right? And so the thing about this, when I knew you were going to have me on, I thought, what is the thing about America? Wokeism and greed. And what's the thing about China? They don't play by the rules. And nobody is forcing them to play by the rules. I saw this morning. I took a snapshot of it. So this is it right here. It says, this is about the Philippines. Philippines just met with China, and their big deal is oil exploration in the South China Sea. It said, in addition to signing a raft of China-Philippines cooperation agreements on commerce, infrastructure, and tourism, Xi proposed joint oil and gas exploration by the two countries in the contested waters of the South China Sea. China claims almost the entire region, up to an arbitrary barrier invented by Beijing called the 9-dash line. China's claims were ruled illegal by an international arbitration court in 2016, but China routinely ignores the decision.
Sure. Yeah.
So if you and I had said, okay, we're going to play Scrabble, you can't, there are no outside sources. You can't look up a dictionary, anything. And then we start playing, and then in the middle of your turn, you just get a Scrabble dictionary out and start flipping through it. I go, wait. You can't do that. You're like, oh, okay. And you keep flipping through it. Well, what am I going to do? And so that's a terribly trite example of what China. There's a great documentary, if you haven't seen it. It's called The Empire of Red Gold. If you want to understand the way China thinks, you need to watch the documentary, The Empire of Red Gold. It is about tomatoes. The Chinese they don't eat tomatoes in their diet. They do now. They've just started adding tomatoes in their diets in the last really 10 years, okay? But about 20 years ago, somebody got on the idea of tomatoes. They now control 65% of the tomato population, the tomato in the world. 65% of the tomato industry on the planet is controlled by the Chinese, and they didn't get into the business until 20 years ago.
Interesting.
It is terrifying to watch this. It ain't about tomatoes, by the way. If you think that documentary is about tomatoes, you're a moron. It ain't got nothing to do with tomatoes. It's the idea behind China. They get into a game, they game the system every way they can, and they play it. And it's also handcuffing. I look at regulations. Again, there's that balance. If I'm going to produce those chips, those microchips here in this country, those processors, those semiconductors in this country, and I have to jump through 47 million pages of regulations, I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to go somewhere else where I can just do business. And so that's that fine line between, keeping our rivers clean and keeping our skies clean and not, but then you look at OSHA. How far does OSHA need to go before it stymies my ability to make a cell phone cover for my cell phone?
Sure.
And then the EPA and then all these regulatory things. And I had said this about Trump when he became president. One of the number one things he did domestically, which I loved, and we do this with our kids, by the way. This is great. And I did get this from him. As he said when he was president, if you want to institute a new, I can't think of the word, like the EPA, a new regulation. Any new regulation that comes on the books, you have to take 2 off.
Okay.
So we do that with our kids when they're little with toys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Great.
love that.
Yeah,
I
you want to bring a new toy in? That's fine.
Yep.
Gotta get rid
Which
of it.
two are you getting rid of?
That's right.
Yeah, I love that. Well, you were saying earlier about, a chip, say $15 here, and then
Right.
or whatever, and then you go to China and you can make it for $5 or whatever. When it comes to international trade, that seems to be one area that would be a pretty valid point for decent and wise and well-structured governmental regulation.
Yes.
Because you can't expect, me here in Nashville, just this having a privately owned company to, to not start making chips over there if it's $5 instead of 15 over here. I mean, good grief. I mean, that would just be, that's just basic business,
and
right?
that's where tariffs come in and those
exactly,
type of things.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So it seems like international trade is one place where some decent regulation makes a ton of sense. Because someone has to have the bigger picture in mind, and someone needs to understand foreign relations. You can't expect the average business person to understand all of that. I mean, there's a reason for government, right?
And there's a place for government, by the way. I'm not an anarchist. That there's no government. No. We need taxes for a civilized society. We need good defense. We need good trade. We want to trade with other countries.
Yes, absolutely. You mentioned documentaries, and the one that I watched recently on the Daily Wire is called "China: The Enemy Within," and it does talk a lot about China. You would really enjoy this. The Daily Wire has some good stuff, by the way.
I need to. My wife wanted to subscribe. I think we probably will.
I think that you should.
Yeah.
I think you can probably afford it, and I think that you would really enjoy it. I started with someone throwing me the login info that they had that allowed me to watch Matt Walsh's documentary, "What Is a Woman?"
Oh, I want to see that.
You haven't seen that? You should see that.
I need to.
I was pleasantly surprised by how he went about that and his demeanor and tone in the documentary. It was.
I've seen excerpts.
It was better than I expected.
Yeah.
And then I watched Candace Owens' documentary on Black Lives Matter, and there was a lot of surprises in there for me. A lot of surprises in there. A lot of that stuff I did not know.
Yeah. Follow the money.
Yeah, follow the money. Exactly.
Follow the money.
And but the most recent one that I watched on there is China: The Enemy Within, and it details how their long-term play on countless fronts. I mean, it's countless fronts. I mean, to go down the different fronts, Hollywood. I mean, it's a lot of the stuff that I had first heard a couple of years ago, and to be honest, I just wrote a lot of it off. I'm like, that's crazy, And it's a lot of the stuff you heard 2-3 years ago sounded pretty crazy, and a lot of it's turned out to be true. But this is the thing I wanted to get to. One of the things that gets pointed out in that little mini series, I think there's like 5 or 6 different episodes. It details why Fauci acted the way he did. It gives some reasons for that. It shows how people in our government at the highest levels, and including the highest level possible, have ties with China. It talks about China's influence in the NBA, which was interesting to me because just as sort of someone who's not paying much attention at all to most sports, certainly really not the NBA, it did seem to me that for some reason the NBA was a little bit more, at least some of their players were a little bit more active politically, and it explains why.
Follow the money.
Follow the money. And so the NBA and Hollywood, this is another thing that I'd heard a couple years ago.
Chinese own AMC.
AMC.
The movie chain.
Well, what I didn't know was, they were so notorious for ripping everything off that decades ago we went to them and said, look, don't rip this stuff off. We would just give you a piece of the business.
Isn't that unbelievable?
It's unbelievable. So I do recommend that The Enemy Within. But this is what I wanted to get to with that. And this is what scares me the most is, yes, China, but it's China through our elites.
Sure.
So at the end of the day, or not at the end of the day, the most pressing issue right now is with our people in power versus essentially the rest of the country. And it's not every person in power, but when you have responsibility at that level, it's very important that you have America's best interests in mind.
Correct.
And there are decisions being made that clearly are not the best for America, but they're being done because of the personal financial interest for these people in charge. And China is playing a large part in that.
And they know that.
I'm sure you probably saw this. I didn't know that when it happened, but the one thing that documentary details is things like as blatant as Chinese spies over here. The head chemist of Harvard a couple years ago was arrested because he was spying for the Chinese.
Sure.
And then you have this senator, congresswoman, I forget who it was, someone in California, someone in her staff was discovered as a Chinese spy, and she says publicly that it's not that big a deal. He wasn't doing anything wrong. Like, why are we covering for these people? So, well, it's because of personal financial interests. I mean, LeBron James said this in an interview at some point in the last couple of years, where he's mentioning financial ramifications for saying certain things.
Sure.
And so the thing that I am less worried about, I guess, is sort of us versus whoever's opposing us, or us versus the rest of the world, or whatever, us versus China. I'm less worried about that. But when it's us versus us,
that's the key.
That's a problem. That's a real problem. I mean, that's the track that's going to get us in trouble. If we keep going down that road and people in power are making decisions that are advantageous to them personally, but are disadvantageous for the country, that's the type of thing that gets you really in trouble and you maybe don't recover from.
I think I might butcher this. I think it was Panem et Circuses, bread and circuses. That was when a Roman emperor took over and wanted to reinstitute the gladiatorial games and built the Colosseum. That was the goal. No, why? Why do I want to give the public circuses, gladiatorial games, and bread? Because I want them full and I want them entertained. Because when the rabble is full and entertained, they're not causing trouble.
Ooh, okay.
Right.
Literally this week, I was saying to my wife, I don't know that there's anything conspiratorial going on here, but it's interesting to me how people are so attached to the umbilical cord of culture, etc., where it's like everyone gears up for Christmas. We buy.
Right.
We can't afford it, but we go buy, and we have Christmas. And then a tiny little bit, now it's all about New Year's, and everyone's all into New Year's. A little bit of time goes by, and there's the Super Bowl, and then, or maybe it's Valentine's Day, and then it's all these, and then it's the World Cup, and then it's the Olympics, and so, good grief, if you follow all this stuff, then you're just going through life totally just paying attention to whatever else is out there. And at what point would you stop and think about the direction your life is going, making your own decisions, the direction the country's going, that type of thing, that distraction piece? That's interesting that you say that.
That's what successful magicians have been that way for, since the beginning of magic. It's misdirection. I just need you to look over here at the shiny thing, and you don't realize I'm lifting your wallet out of your pocket. Look over here. Look. And that's what the Chinese have figured out. That's what our elites have figured out. If I can keep you busy, if I can keep you focused on this streaming service over here, this TikTok, this Twitch, this Twitter, this whatever. I need you really pissed off at your neighbor too. I really need you mad and engaged. Because if you can do that, then you're not looking at what I'm doing over here. Mm-hmm. Up here, pay attention. And that's what they're doing. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's amazing. And so you look at a guy like me, and you say, well, okay, Mr. Big Shot, what are some of your answers? Well, I think my answers are tough, and I don't know if my answers will ever be imposed. It's been interesting to watch the speakership thing go through. You had a group of 20 people saying, I'm not going to vote for you, McCarthy. I'm not doing it. And of course, he won this last night. 15th round. He finally won as the speaker because a few of those holdouts voted present. They didn't vote for him. They voted present. And if they vote for present, then you get to reduce the number needed by 1. So if they needed 218 and 2 people say I voted present, then he only needs 216 to win the speakership, which is what happened. Matt Gaetz from Florida decided to just vote present. And that meant I'm not throwing my vote either way. I think there's some common sense things. You know, it's funny when you look at you were talking about these younger guys of the founding fathers. You know, have you ever read who was in Washington's first cabinet? I mean, it's the who's who. You know, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, John Jay. I mean, he had the intellectual icons. It was the who's who of the 1927 Yankees murderers row. I mean, it was the greatest ever assembled. And even then, you had a faction. Hamilton, he was a Federalist. He believed that we needed a strong federal government in order to keep this experiment alive and keep it going, that the states would argue with each other too much and it would be too fraction. Then you had a guy like Jefferson that was a Democrat at that point, not the Democrat like we have today, but it was called a Democrat at that time. And they believed in states' rights, and they wanted the states to have the not just the states' rights, but they wanted the states to lead this experiment. And so you had that argument. Now Washington was a Federalist. He believed and understood that we needed a strong federal government, specifically an army, and we needed to get the finances. Those are the big two things. We needed a strong economy, we needed a strong army. And I'm not going to disagree with that. But there was that tension. But here's the interesting thing about it. None of these guys, none of them at the time considered themselves lifelong politicians.
Is that true?
They really didn't. And that is I'm not going to say a newer phenomenon, because you had a guy like John Quincy Adams. You know, he was the ambassador to Russia when he was 14, probably one of the smartest presidents in terms of raw intellect we've ever had.
Come on.
Complete pompous ass. Oh, absolutely. People hated his guts.
John Quincy Adams.
He was 14. Yeah, he
was ambassador to Russia when he was 14.
And could do it. Like
how old is the country at this point?
Let's see. He was the 6th president. He was at his. He was young.
Yeah, but more than like a year or two. Like that seems. I mean, good grief. Did we not have anyone?
Well, here's
older?
the thing. Well, but the thing is, he was qualified
at 14 years of age.
Cat was smart. Dude was just brilliant. He was brilliant. He was very brilliant. I think raw intellect, probably the smartest president we ever had in terms of just sheer brain power.
Really?
Probably John Quincy Adams. He was amazingly intelligent, and his dad was an intellectual giant, John Adams. But even those guys, John Adams was a lawyer. He gave up his fortune in order to do what he did. He was a pompous jerk, and he knew it. It's one of the reasons why he told Jefferson to write the Declaration of Independence. And Jefferson said, "Why me?" He goes, "Number one, you write better than I do, and number two, people like you. They don't like me." And Adams had a lot to input in the Declaration of Independence once it was already written. But it was 85% probably, it was Jefferson. But these guys, they didn't see themselves. Washington, time and time again. And Washington, he knew his image. He understood branding better than anybody. But he really did just want to go back home. He saw himself as a gentleman farmer, and that's what he kept trying to get to.
It's more of a burden, right, to be a politician back then?
You're not. Are you kidding? Of course it was a burden. Yeah. That's a great point. It was a burden to be a politician. I'm giving up whatever the commerce is that I do to become a politician. In other words, it was sacrificial to be a politician at that time. It's a great point. And that's not the way that it is now. You're being enriched. I mean, you look at how little money some of these congressmen have when they go in there and the level of wealth that they have when they go out. It's not commensurate to someone who made $185,000 a year, which is roughly what they make. It's like $174, something like that, and who just did well with their investments.
Ka-ching. Did you know that Paul Pelosi has performed better than Warren Buffett?
Oh, way better. Not just slightly. He's beat Warren Buffett in the ground on his returns. But it has nothing to do with the fact that his wife is connected in Washington. So
of course not.
So you say, well, okay, would term limits fix everything? No, but they would be definitely all right. So I'm gonna get on my soapbox. I'm on a podcast for this. If it's okay, let me let it rip. All right.
Worst that'll happen is you're gonna be late for that wedding.
Bonnie,
I hope it's not one of your kids getting married.
No. Bonnie says to me, she goes, "Are you gonna get like arrested for saying some of this stuff?" I said, "I don't know. I guess when the revolution starts, they'll find this." All right. So here's a couple of simple, this is common sense, and this is what the American public wants. The weird part about it is there's only two ways it's going to happen. Enough people will get pissed off and there will be a revolution. And I mean an actual literal revolution. Or maybe some weird event will occur where the people who are in power will actually acquiesce for some reason. And I can't even think about what that would be. All right, term limits. So you say, well, Rick, you have a magic wand and you can set term limits. What does that look like? I have no problem with the president having a 4-year term. I actually think that's a legit term. It takes you a year just to find your feet. It takes you a couple of years to get things going. And I have no problem with 2. You know, we didn't have term limits till the 1950s. Most people don't realize that for the president. Yeah, Washington was a colonel in the British Army. He gave up his sword. He gave up his commission. That's the first time he gave up power. Goes back to his farm. He farms. Stuff starts happening. The revolution occurs. He becomes a major general. He is he's a lieutenant general. As how far he rose, which was a 3-star, and he was the general of the army. He gives up his commission. Second time. His hero was Cincinnatus, who did the same thing. Gave up ultimate power to be a farmer, which is all he wanted. He was ambitious, but he gave up the power. Then he's asked to be president. If you've ever read the letters written to this guy to ask him to be president, it was insane. I mean, this guy was emphatic about no.
Really?
He did not want it. Huh. He wanted to be a farmer. And he'd already given up just massive power twice. So he becomes the president. He gets to the second term and he's like, look, that's enough. They need somebody else in here. And he had already established he was in the pantheon. I mean, he was the guy. And so he gave up ultimate power 3 times. And he goes back to Mount Vernon. Okay.
Was it 2 4-year terms?
2 4-year terms.
Because even back then, the terms were 4 years. Okay.
That's correct. Yeah, I think it was 1789 to 1797, and then he died 2 years later, died in 1799. Okay, so he does that. Well, then there were no term limits, which is why FDR was elected 4 times. And he died at the beginning of his 4th term, and then Truman took over, and then they decided we need to do something about this.
I see.
So they finally, put the amendment in the Constitution. I forget which one it is. I'm sorry, I don't know. But so there are term limits on the presidency, 2 4-year terms, and you can't serve more than 10 years as presidency. So if it's more than 2 years of a predecessor's term, you can only have one of your own.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that either.
That's right. So you actually can serve 9.5 years.
Theoretically, you could be president for 9.5 years.
Yeah, I'm a vice president. We're a year into your term. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. We're 3 years into your term. You die, get assassinated, whatever. I'm able to take over and finish your year. Then I can still run for 2 full terms.
I see.
As long as it's not more than half. Okay. So let's do 8 years as the benchmark. I like 8 years as a benchmark. I think it's a good one. Now, senatorial terms right now are 6 years. I would change those to 4. You get a 4-year Senate term. Congressional terms are for 2. I have no problem with that. None of you are serving more than 8. I don't care the circumstances. On your 8th, you're out. There's another thing. You can't be a lobbyist afterwards. If you're found being a lobbyist, you go to prison.
Isn't that a novel idea?
If you're found being a lobbyist, you go to prison. Because they would say you're not a lobbyist, but they would technically be lobbying. So a staunch prison sentence for lobbying after you leave office. Number 3, when you pay them well. Pay congressmen and senators. I don't care if you pay them $1 million a year. Right now, the president makes $400,000 a year. Pay him $1 million a year. I have no problem with it. Mm-hmm. The day you leave office, you lose everything. I mean, not a dime. There's no retirement. There's no pension fund. There's no this. There's no that. That gravy train ends. You got paid well while you were in office. Mm-hmm. So you better have done well with your money. Mm-hmm. If you don't know what to do, talk to Paul Pelosi. He'll tell you. Mm-hmm. Right? Next thing. If you are a federal employee of any kind whatsoever, I don't care if you're a mailman or if you are the vice president, and you want to run for a federally held office, you must resign before you announce. So I'm a congressman from Tennessee, and I decide I want to run for the Senate. I must resign my congressionalship. Then I can run. Mm-hmm. If I lose, I lost. I'm unemployed. Mm-hmm. Okay. Think about the insanity of that. Let's think about a congressman that wants to be a senator. Let's say that my congressionalship is working for Coca-Cola, and my desire to be a senator is working for Pepsi. Now, I'm currently a high-level manager at Coke, but they're offering me a vice presidency at Pepsi. Now imagine if I went to my bosses at Coca-Cola and I said, hey guys, I got this opportunity over here. I'm going to spend the next 2 years really working hard to see if this is going to work out. Now, if it doesn't, I'm still your guy. But if it does, I'm going to go ahead and go work there. Now, you're going to keep paying me for these next 2 years, okay? And if it doesn't work out, we'll let bygones be bygones. How does that sound? Now, what do you think Coca-Cola would say?
Yeah. Okay, so you're pointing this out not so much because Congress is a competitor to the Senate, but rather because if you're going to be a Congress person, then you need to be engaged and focused.
That is precisely what
present there. And if you're going to be spending 2 years to try to be a senator, fine. Don't try to do two jobs at once. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And also, it's a fail-safe. Well, if I run for the Senate and I'd lose the Senate, well, at least I'm still a congressman. No. You resign. Well, I am the head of the CDC, and I decide I want to run to be a congressman. Well, that is a federally held position. You must resign in order to run. Any federally held position of any kind, if it is a federally held position. Now, the states can do what the states want to do. If you work for the federal government in any role whatsoever and you want to run for office, you must resign your position to do that.
Okay, the things that you're listing are things that if you could make some changes right now,
I do them immediately.
You would make these changes. Anything else you would add on this list in terms of the federal government in particular?
I mean, there's a ton. I think a balanced budget amendment. I have to balance my budget for my family. It's real simple. If I have $5,000 coming in a month and I've got $5,000 going out a month, then we're at a zero balanced budget. If I want to save money, I have to have more coming in that's going out. All right. And so we got to do one of two things. We either have to cut spending or have to increase our amount of money that we make. Now, the government doesn't make anything. It's very important for people to understand. When somebody says, oh, I got this for free. No, you didn't. The government doesn't have any means of production in this country. They do in China, by the way. It's very interesting. They use a capitalistic approach and framework, but it's all communistic in nature. Whereas here, the government doesn't produce anything. Federal contracts for the United States government. How much money a day in federal contracts are awarded every day? Roughly. This is a rough estimate. $1 billion.
$1 billion a day?
Every day.
In federal contracts?
Federal contracts. Every day. Every single day, there's $1 billion. Right? So I think accountability, it's insane. Only president we had that was debt-free as a country was Andrew Jackson. He was
the country was debt-free when Andrew Jackson was president?
Didn't owe a penny.
Okay.
He was the only one.
Yep. So you're saying the country, not the presidents personally.
Correct.
The country.
The country did not owe a dime to anyone when Andrew Jackson was the president. He was the only one.
The greed and woke stuff is fascinating to me because it seems pretty spot on. And you're saying greed and wokeness in terms of if you really had to just pick two of the biggest issues at play in our society and government and culture today. Yeah. You're picking greed and woke. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I would not disagree with that. I think the greed is a little more self-evident and
universal. It's not just American.
Absolutely.
So I want to be clear on that. But the wokeism, it is uniquely Western. It's uniquely Western.
That's what I want to get to is just to poke at that just a little bit because also the greed is Democrats, Republicans, right, left. I mean, I have greed in my own heart, right? I mean, you know, so that, but I don't want to pass over it. I guess I'm not making light of greed. It's a huge issue. I mean, it's behind a lot of the issues. I mean, when you have heads of FDA going and working for big pharma because of the perks, like this is an issue, right? I mean, and you wouldn't do that if it wasn't financial, right? So, and ultimately greed's behind that. Okay. Woke.
Yeah.
It seems to be somewhat of a cancer.
Yes.
In our society.
Yes.
It seems to be a uniquely Western thing.
And that has happened with astonishing speed.
Yes.
I mean, it's just 10 or 15 years where it's gotten crazy.
Oh, yeah. It seems to me that in the last year or two, though, more people are waking up to the craziness.
It's exciting.
And maybe are starting to push back on it a little bit.
I love what's happened to Disney. Oh, that's been wonderful.
Okay. But so I have some hope in that area because I'm seeing more people I guess my perception is more people are realizing that this is the depths of the crazy train
Right.
that maybe didn't 2-3 years ago
Right.
and sort of gave it more the benefit of the doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And I would put myself in that very category.
Yeah. What allowed you to see that?
Well, I think that, we Googled a couple weeks ago, we Googled the definition of wokeness, and it was like, this is about social justice.
Right.
And I would like to think I'm about social justice, right? I mean, if you have people being treated differently based on things that they can't control, that would seem like something that we'd want to change. And we want but it's more than that. Like, it seems like there's an agenda here.
Yeah.
And
So let's go to that. You said a control change. Let's assume that I have. I'm trying to think of something that required. Okay, pilots in the military. There's a height requirement. There's a height limit to be a pilot in the military. There's a reason for that. If you were 6'5", you physically cannot fit in the cockpit of that plane.
oh, there's an upper end height limit?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. I would have thought you would have said
No,
the other way.
it's the other way.
Huh.
You physically can't fit in the cockpit. I'm not discriminating because you're 6'5". You can't fit in the cockpit. Yeah, but you're against my right. It's not about your rights. You can't fit in the cockpit. So if you have a business, and let's say that you have an image in your head of what you want your spokespeople to look like. Let's say they're women. Now, this is real controversial. Now, let's say you want a type of body image, thin, fit, okay? There were people in this country that would be offended by that. That's your problem. You need to get over that.
Mm-hmm.
If you feel guilty because you're fat, that's your problem. You need to figure that out. But don't shame me because I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
If you feel guilty because you're poor, I'm sorry. But I chose to save and invest my money. I'm not going to feel guilty for working insanely hard and sacrificing and not doing all the stuff that idiots with their money do so that I can actually have some, so that I'm not up against it all the time. You chose to watch TV and never crack a book. I have an actual library in my house, and I read all the time. Don't make me feel bad because you don't read. That's on you. You had access to free books. You had access to free libraries. You had transportation for free to those libraries, and I'm actually not against that. Carnegie made all that money, and Carnegie was responsible for an enormous part of our library system because he just gave away hundreds of millions of dollars building libraries. So if you're poor in this country and you live in a city, they will give you a free bus pass to go to a free library to get all the information you want to. And now with the internet in your pocket, you can have access to more information than any library could possibly have. But we want to be on TikTok. And we want to be on these moronic games and stuff and social media. And so personal accountability is a big part of that. We're talking about wokeism and greed. Personal accountability is a big part of that. You're in shape. Why are you in shape?
Because it sucks way worse to not be in shape.
Okay, but how'd you physically get in shape?
You got to,
you exercise?
Get plenty of sleep. You got to exercise. You got to stop drinking alcohol. Drink plenty of water.
Do you eat well?
Eat real food.
Okay, so
it's
you eat
not
real
crazy.
food.
Just eat real food.
Right. Okay.
Go move your body. Get outside.
Okay. So
cardio.
So you made a choice to do that, right? And you have a benefit from that choice. I don't know how to play the piano. I used to play by ear, but I would get a bad headache after. Anyway, bad joke. So okay, right.
Mary had a little lamb with your ear.
Exactly. You did. And so my kids are like, your dad jokes, Dad, they're killing me. So I don't know how to play the piano. Well, why? Why can't I play the piano well?
You didn't invest time.
I didn't invest the time. I didn't practice.
But you probably could.
I could if I wanted to. If it were a
you
priority,
prioritize it.
That's exactly right. So I don't feel guilty or bad about myself because I can't play Chopin or whatever, but my friend is an amazing piano player. God bless him. Good for him. And you've got a person over here that understands mechanics and they know how an engine goes. And when their engine block cracks or their engine head gasket in their they're like, oh, man, that's terrible. It's going to take me 5 hours to fix that. And then they get to work and they fix it. I'm impressed by a guy like that because I didn't take my time to learn. I know basics of mechanics, but I don't feel qualified to do something like that. And quite frankly, I don't want to take the time to do it. I'd rather put my time elsewhere. And so I have to pay a guy like that to do that. But he put the time in, or she put the time in to do that. And so what we're missing, and this is what, not just the Chinese, this is what the elites understand. This is what a lot of people are missing is personal accountability, personal responsibility. You're responsible for you and your actions, good and bad. You didn't study, that's on you. I didn't come from an environment that allowed me to study, though. I had barking dogs. I had a bunch of little siblings I had to help raise. I had a mom who had, 6 different kids from 5 different guys, and they were all over the place. Listen, it sucks, and I really feel bad for you. I do, and we need to work to try to help you out. But ultimately, you're going to have to find a way. Abraham Lincoln read by candlelight, and he would read a book till the pages were worn thin, and then go try to find another one. He found a way. You can find a way. But I bet you can tell me what latest song is out there, or what latest show is on TV, or who's on The Bachelor, or what's going on TikTok. I bet you can tell me those things. So don't sit here and tell me you don't have the time or the ability to do those things and not take care of yourself. And I get it. If you're born in crap and, it's a crap show and it's terrible, then it makes it more difficult. And I'm not saying that we all start off on an equal plane, and we all won't wind up on an equal plane. But what we do have is equal opportunity, not equal guarantee of outcome. The last time I was on here, I said my favorite image is 2 side-by-side images about fair and equal. I don't know if you remember that. These boys, there's 3 guys trying to peer over a fence.
Yeah, I remember this.
And one guy's really tall, one guy's normal height, and one guy's short. And there are some boxes there, 3 boxes. Equal is each guy gets a box. The tall guy, well, he already could see over the fence. Now he's really tall. The middle guy, he can see over. So he's the only one that benefits from the equality. But the little guy only gets 1 box. He still can't see over the fence. Now, none of those guys had anything to do with the heights they were born with. They didn't choose those heights. They had nothing to do with it. It was genetics. It was random genetics. But the heights did make a difference and impacted their lives. But fair is the tall guy doesn't get a box. Well, why doesn't he get a box? Well, he didn't need it. He can see over the fence without the box, right? The middle guy only needs 1 box, and he can see just fine. The little guy needs 2 boxes. And so I love that side-by-side image, and we have that saying in our family a lot. Fair and equal is not the same thing. Don't ever come to me and say, but Happy got so-and-so, or but Rory got, no. That's the worst thing to say to me, because don't you worry about them.
So you're saying you believe in fair over equal. Is that right?
I absolutely believe in fair over equal.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So how would you define, when you say woke, how would you define that? One of the things I was hearing you say is maybe one definition of wokeness, if we were trying to make it a little bit less vague, or put a pinpoint it a little bit more, could one definition of wokeness be, you have something that I do not have, and I want what you have, but I don't want to put in what you did to get it?
I think that
is
would
that
be
one way you would think about wokeness?
I could agree with that.
How would you think about? How would you define it when we say woke? How would you define it?
I think, goodness gracious, that you're actually cornering me a little bit here. I don't know if I have an actual definition of woke. I think it's the pushing of an agenda, which we've all got an agenda to push, I guess. I think it's the refusal to use common sense on some things. The Ketanji Brown refusing to say what a woman is. That's an example of woke. Making me try to feel guilty for any success I've had, or to feel bad because you haven't had success.
Yep.
See, my goal is not just to have success for me. And it's just like America being strong is not just good for America, it's good for the world, because our ideals are so different from much of the world about freedom and success and those type of things. And I really do still believe in that. I really do. Well, if I take care of my family and raise my kids right and have a good, strong marriage, and my faith is good, and et cetera, I'm going to be better for those around me. So my goal isn't just to do well for me and my family, because that's self-contained.
Right.
My goal is to be a light for people around me. So if I learn something, like that thing about putting your money in your checking, your savings account, and not your. See, I don't want to tell people that because I want to be a loudmouth know-it-all. I want to tell people that because it can help them. Mm-hmm. And so if there's one little trick like that changes somebody's life, hey, man, that's good, right? I had a guy yesterday said, I'm trying to put some money back for my kid's college. What should I put it in? And I gave him, based on 25 years of a lot of studying and investing knowledge, this is what I recommend, and this is why. That's another thing about wokeism. I don't think a lot of people who are woke, as it were, I don't think they understand. I think some are nefarious and have some bad intentions. But I think a lot of people just go along to get along because they don't want to be ostracized or called out on it.
Oh, yeah.
Top Gun did really well last year. Top Gun, I think, was the #1 movie of the year. And to my knowledge, I didn't feel like there was any wokeism in the movie. And if it was, it was very, very subtle. It was so subtle that I didn't probably catch a whole lot of it. My woke radar is pretty strong. So you watch a movie like Ford versus Ferrari. I mean, I've talked about this in our last time we met.
I don't remember that we did.
Oh, one of the best movies ever made.
I agree.
Okay. So I'm going to give you an example about this, and you got to understand. Okay. In 1964, when that movie was set, it was the mid-60s, 64, 65, there weren't black people in Formula One racing. There weren't. Le Mans racing. There weren't a lot of black folks in that. They didn't go back and put black people in the movie to make you feel better. Do I think it's right that there weren't? No, that's a different conversation for a different day.
But the movie was accurately portraying the reality
accurately
of the day.
portrayed. The executives at Ford were a bunch of middle-aged white dudes. Well, that's how they portrayed them, as middle-aged white dudes. And you didn't have this rainbow coalition of a pit crew to make someone feel better. You didn't have a fat gauge having in their ear eyebrow pierced purple-haired lesbian on the pit crew. Am I saying that that's wrong if you do? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that it wasn't that way in 1965. And so they didn't try to recreate that to make you feel better. They recreated it accurately to 1965. And you can have your own feeling and discussion about how it makes you feel that there weren't a purple-haired, lesbian. That's fine. That's up to you. But they were accurate to what it was like. And I thought it was fantastic because of the movie.
I agree.
Because it was portrayed accurately.
Yes. I think another example of some of the pushback against wokeness is how well the TV show Yellowstone is doing.
Okay.
It's the #1 TV show on TV.
There you go.
And it's about ranchers fighting against progress, basically. And I mean, I like that, and I love that show personally. I'm just surprised at how well it's done.
Yeah.
Considering the subject matter of it, and it's the #1 show on TV.
Look at Disney. Disney, and don't let him try to fool you. Bob Iger, he ushered in the age of wokeness at Disney. They have an agenda, and it is very clear that they have an agenda. And Walt Disney, who was not a perfect man in and of himself, but I've studied a lot about George Washington and Walt Disney. I've read a whole lot about both of those guys. And some of his ideals were wonderful, and I absolutely love. And one of the things was, #1, he didn't do sequels. There was never a sequel done in Walt Disney's life. The last project he worked on personally was The Jungle Book, and then he died. And then after that, sequels started rolling in. They're cash cows. They're cash grabs. Okay, so you're changing an idea from money, from the ideal of creating great art and entertainment to money. Okay, which that's a whole nother subject. And then his whole thing was about being able to provide a great experience, regardless of what the medium was, whether it was live action, whether it was the parks, whether it was a quilt that you made. It didn't matter what it was, a drawing. It was to be able to provide entertainment through art. Okay, so then Walt Disney started going on this woke trail a few years ago. They started doing Pride Days at Walt Disney World. Now, I've got a friend of mine. I won't say who he is because that's not fair to him, but he's very high up in the world of Washington and Washington, D.C., and he's extremely well connected, and he's also in the religious world, okay? And he said, I had less of a problem with it then because at the same time they were doing that, they also had Faith Night. So at least there was some balance to it. Okay, you don't like Pride stuff and you think that's wrong? Fine, don't come to Pride Day. But over here, let's say that you're a Christian, conservative Christian, and okay, great. We got Faith Night. So maybe there's a pride guy that doesn't want to go to faith night. There's a faith night, but there was some balance. But they stopped doing that. They stopped doing that for fear of backlash. And that's one of the things that this country has gotten into is we say, okay, not only are you not doing it my way, so I'm mad at you, but you're doing it their way, and I'm going to cancel you because of that, right? So I have some thoughts on homosexuality. I've got some ways I think about that. That if I voiced those thoughts, I would sound like a bigot and I would be canceled because I disagree with it. I didn't say you couldn't be homosexual. That's your business.
Personally disagree.
Because I personally disagree. So you got the guy, Dan Cathy at Chick-fil-A, and a lot of people call it Chick No Gay. That's what they call it, right? Because this man has asked a personal question, not as the CEO of Chick-fil-A. He was personally asked, and he didn't say anything about gay. He said, I believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. That was his only statement. And the guy was politically crucified by a very small but extremely loud, vocal set of people. He didn't say you couldn't be gay. I guarantee you, I have never seen a situation where somebody has gone into a Chick-fil-A and said, I'd like a chicken sandwich. And they said, are you queer? Because we're not going to serve you if you are. That's never happened.
But you know what's interesting about that, though, is he says something like that, and there's, lots of noise. And 2-3 weeks ago, I had some kid with me somewhere, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to run this kid through the Chick-fil-A drive-thru and treat him a little bit. Slant, like so full. The drive-thru was full. Two lines, completely full.
Yeah.
Right across the road, McDonald's, not one single car.
Is that not unbelievable?
Unbelievable.
Okay.
So all the noise, all the chatter.
So why?
Business doing fine.
All right, so let's go there. Why? Why is that? People vote with their feet. People vote with their wallets. Chick-fil-A produces a good experience, good food, quickly. McDonald's is a train wreck. I mean, if you get good service at McDonald's, it is the exception.
That's right. Yeah. And the quality is not very consistent either.
At Chick-fil-A, it is the exception.
Exactly right.
Right? And so you've got enough people that are just saying, I'm tired of this. I'm sick of it.
And that's my hope, too. For one of the areas that I'm optimistic about, too, is, back to like now the biggest media platform in the world happens to be a podcast, and it's not CNN or even Fox or whatever. People, I think, are starting to tune out some of the crazy a little more.
I hope.
I think when some of the crazy started to come along, it caught some of us by surprise, and we got interested in it. We started to pay attention to it, and God forbid we get canceled, or God forbid we our name gets cycled into this frenzy for some period of time, and now it's like, big, who cares?
Right.
It has its little 15 minutes of fame, and it passes, and guess what? It doesn't matter anymore. I mean, is there really even that many billionaires or famous people or powerful people or people with influence that haven't been canceled at some point now? Big whoop-de-doo. It passes and you move on. So people, that's one area I guess where I'm somewhat optimistic about is the truth something about truth. There's something about the nature of truth that it tends to self-elevate. It tends to reveal itself over time. And if you have enough of the people, and if that's true, then if you give it some time, and if someone wants to go over here and have a news network where all they're doing is pushing their narrative and their agenda, and it becomes clear over time it's just propaganda, people stop paying attention to that. And they start paying attention to what seems fair and accurate.
Right. So if you look at CNN's ratings, I mean, it's insane. ESPN stopped focusing on sports and started focusing on politics. Have you seen the numbers of ESPN in the last 10 years? It's incredible how far they have fallen.
Isn't ESPN owned by Disney now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, interesting. So back to the woke stuff. What's your assessment? All right, so greed, woke. What's your assessment of the woke? And by the way, I want to say also that I think it helps to dig into the different areas that we feel woke captures is an umbrella for, like the definition of wokeness, because it's very otherwise it just sort of hangs out there.
Sure.
And And I think when you actually define it, it's like, ooh, those are big deals.
So how would you define it?
I don't think I'm going to be the best at defining it. I mean, that's why we Googled a couple weeks ago and it was like, oh, it's about justice. Well, oh, shoot, the Bible talks about justice.
Sure.
This sounds fine to me.
Right.
But it's a lot more than that. I think it has to do with, you have something that I don't have and I want what you have.
Right.
And I want to make you feel bad about you having it, but I don't have it, but I don't want to put in the work I don't want to put in the work that you put in to get it. Mm-hmm. It seems to have a lot to do with transgenderism, mm-hmm. which is interesting to me. That seems to be, matter of fact, there was a lot of funding with Black Lives Matter that went to the transgender agenda, mm-hmm. which is odd. Because it's hard for me to understand the correlation between transgender and, someone being treated differently because their skin is black. Right. That's not an easy leap for me to fully understand immediately. But the transgender thing seems to be tied up in wokeism very much. People's fragility seems to be tied up in wokeism very much, very fragile. Yes. I mean, God forbid you say something that offends me, and then I go on the internet on my phone that has cobalt in its battery that human slavery was involved in creating, and I make you feel bad about something that you're out there doing. You're busting your ass out there working hard, and I'm over here on my phone on TikTok, whatever, making you feel bad. That's absurd. Right. Yeah. So I think it's all those things. It seems to have something to do also with sort of a removal of standards and common sense. Like, you don't get to talk about me being 300 pounds when really, my natural body makeup is more so that I would be 210 pounds or 175 pounds, but I'm 300 because I just sit around and eat all the time. You don't get to talk about that. You don't even get to talk about how that can be bad for my health.
How about you get to talk about whatever you want to?
Exactly.
Because it's a freedom of speech. And if I'm offended, that's my fault.
And I also think that we were talking about wokeism, what's involved with that. And we were just talking about not having our feelings offended. But what's behind that then is the only way you could control that is then you can start to control people's speech. And I think we saw this with Twitter. Right. Because now that Elon owned it, and these things are coming out, the Twitter files, which I don't know a ton about, but apparently, and this is the other thing that all of these things, like with Twitter, Facebook, Google, even when it comes to like protecting speech or lowering people's speech or like shadow banning them, removing them from platforms, it has only gone one direction.
That's correct.
Which clearly, repeatedly, every single time. And so it doesn't matter if someone is more right-leaning or left-leaning. I think we can look at the data and say, okay, well, all this stuff, which I would lump in with wokeism. Right. Yeah. It's all left. Like, it's all like, if your viewpoint is leftist, you get to stay up on Twitter. If your viewpoint is right, but they can catch you in some loophole, the people that are getting canceled, they're all on the right. That's my point. Correct. That's my point. So I don't think that's coincidence.
Can you look up ESG on the computer? Do you know what ESG is?
No.
Colby, look this up real quick. Pull it up on the screen. So this is a big part of wokeism. Environmental, social, and governance. And so investors are increasingly applying these non-financial factors as part of their analysis process to identify material risk and growth opportunities. So this is one of the most terrifying things that we've ever seen come around. Okay, let's be clear on this. If I own a company, I have a fiduciary respect. If I'm a publicly traded company, private, you can do what you want to. A publicly traded company, what are you laughing at?
Well, I'm laughing because I think I know where you're going with this, and it's scary to me. Keep going.
It's terrifying. Okay. As a publicly traded company, I have a fiduciary responsibility to my shareholders. Mm-hmm. And my only responsibility to my shareholders is fiduciary. Mm-hmm. It is about the money, period. That is the purpose of that. If there is a social component that I feel I want to have as part of that, then that's fine, but that can't be the impetus of the business. Mm-hmm. So if I invest in the company that makes these mason jars here, probably Ball's a company, Ball State University, that was the Ball family. That's where that comes from. I don't know if you knew that or not.
I didn't.
Yeah, weird. So they make their glass company out of Indiana, right? Okay, so if Ball is a publicly traded company and I invest with Ball, the only thing I'm concerned with as an investor, I'm concerned that they have a good return on their investment. Now, I may find out that this is a Christian conservative business that gives money to charity and really treats their employees well. And that may be a reason why I've chosen to invest with them. But as an investor, my concern, and so they need to be making sure that they are making the decisions for fiduciary reasons. Okay. So what we've seen in the last 10 years, and it's gotten really bad, is we've seen these companies that are adding this ESG, this environmental, social, and what do we say the other one? Governance. They're adding that to their responsibilities. Mm-hmm. Now, this is terrifying because now they're being able to bring in rules and regulations based on how they feel about things, which wasn't the goal. Mm-hmm. If you have the desire, I heard somebody the other day say profit is the only thing that matters in a business. Well, I'm not going to say only thing, but I definitely have to say it's the most important thing. And here's why. If I don't have profit, I can't stay in business. Mm-hmm. And if I can't stay in business, I can't put these things that are important to me in play. So let's say I'm all about the arts. Let's just say that's my thing. And I've got a company over here that makes doors and windows. Well, if I want to fund the arts, then I have to be able to do that with the money that this company makes. So it has to make money. And me as an owner, let's say I own it 100% and I make $10 million a year, and I want to give half of it to the arts, whatever that means. Well, if this company doesn't make money, I can't fund the arts. Mm-hmm. So my company in and of itself has to make profit for me to do these social things. Mm-hmm. Now they're trying to link the two together. And it's getting worse and worse. And so we saw a great example of this with Disney. Disney stock did worse this year. It's down an unprecedented amount. I think 47% this year alone. And the stock is worse than it's been since 1974. Now, if you know anything about Disney, Disney dies in 1966, 1967. He dies. And Disney was just at a loss with itself. They didn't know who they were as a company. They had lost their direction. And they almost went bankrupt and out of business in the mid-70s. And then little by little, they get, they start making their way back. And Michael Eisner becomes the CEO and starts to really to change things. And he's his own character with his own flaws, but they started to become profitable, and they became a juggernaut. And then Iger gets a hold of this thing and takes it from a juggernaut to a supernova. I mean, it becomes insane at this point. But what's interesting is that during all that time, the wokeness thing had not permeated the business. It was still about the shareholder fiduciary responsibility. But then they start putting the woke stuff in here, this ESG stuff, and they start, their movies and their entertainment and ESPN and their theme parks and all this stuff. Then they become nothing but a cash cow, and it just becomes, it just becomes this nasty mess. Well, now they've come home to roost. I mean, it's bad. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be very interesting to see how this high-profile company, it's the largest media company in the world. A lot of people don't realize what all they own. It's insane. It's going to be interesting to see what they do to overcome this stuff. So ESG is a big thing, and that has to do with wokeness as well.
Yeah.
That's a big part of that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that was not on my radar, the term ESG. Where I thought you might be going with that was just how corporations can make decisions that are not in the best interest of folks because it's primarily driven by their responsibility to make more money and increase that money.
Yeah.
And that can lead to bad ends too.
It can.
But I think I understand somewhat why corporations are designed that way, or the way that they are, but it can also, corporations are a great place to hide.
They are.
And that's how they're designed.
I had a friend of mine who was high up in HR in a Fortune 50 company, not a Fortune 500. He was a Fortune 50 company, very intelligent man. And we spent a lot of time together. And I was asking him, I said, how did it work? He said, let me explain to you how it worked. He said, let's a particular group. And for the purposes of this podcast, I won't say a particular group because oddly enough, don't want to be offensive, which is horrible. But let's say that there's a particular group that has an agenda. And they come to him, and that agenda is counter to the norm. but they've got power because they're loud. And they've got a platform. So they come to him in HR and they say, not will you. You are going to do these things. And if you don't, we're going to start ringing the bells. Mm-hmm. And we will bring this thing down. Mm-hmm. What do you do?
Yeah.
Tell them get the hell out of your office and then watch the backlash? Do you give in? You're a publicly traded company. Mm-hmm. Super high profile products all over the world.
Well, given a lot of times, right?
That's what they do.
They start there. But
and then this is where the creep begins. Right? So we talked about this last time, the line between right and wrong. I just need a line. And then as long as I have that line, I can make that line wider and wider and wider to where the area between right and wrong is so fuzzy. Now, they're wanting to change the word pedophile to minor attracted persons.
Yikes. Well, and that gets lumped in with this woke stuff, too. That's I saw a list of words that you can't use anymore. I mean, brave is on that list.
Isn't that unbelievable?
Mom and dad is on that list.
What was it?
It's absurd.
Lactating person?
What do you mean?
That's what they call
a mom?
It's a lactating person.
What is?
It could be a guy, too.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Guys don't lactate.
Yeah, newsflash.
Is that? But the fact that we're having this conversation is ludicrous in and of itself.
It really is. I think one of the unfortunate things with the woke stuff is how much energy it takes up in the room.
Oh, it's amazing.
And we're seeing already some of the effects with how COVID caused us to drastically mishandle our public education system, drastically mishandled COVID, and our kids paid the price.
That's right.
I mean, it's crazy. This isn't necessarily new from COVID, but 19% of our high school graduates can't read. Did you know that? 19% of our high school graduates can't read. And someone said recently, which I thought was a great point, grades 1 through 4, you learn to read. Or grades 1 through 3, I think he said. Grades 4 through 12, you read to learn. So if you can't read,
right,
what are you learning?
And so now we say it's racist. Now we say math is racist.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
Did you not know math is racist?
I did not.
Yeah.
No. Apparently exercising is racist. Science, right?
I mean,
it's crazy. It's absurd.
Right.
So, but my point with the taking the energy out of the room is what I was mentioning was how that we're already seeing the devastating effects that our COVID response, how we handled that, has had on our education for our kids. I wonder what in time we're going to notice with this woke stuff and the effect that had on our kids. Right. And here's what I mean by that is when your teacher is LGBTQ plus, right, and not all of them are the stereotype of what I'm about to say, but some of them are, which is, or maybe, let's just leave it at that they're into the woke stuff or LGBTQ plus. Some of them seem to be about drawing a lot of attention to themselves.
Sure.
Some, I would have to assume, most certainly not all, but some.
I would agree with that.
They draw a lot of attention to themselves. So let's say you're a teacher and this is how you identify, and you're drawing a lot of attention to yourself wherever you go, and you're on TikTok and you're getting a lot of attention there in the school and you're being treated. An extreme example could be that teacher in Canada that had the huge boobs.
That's true.
Maybe it was a man who transitioned over to woman or whatever it was. I don't know a lot about
Somebody
that.
Just wanted attention.
Some have said that's probably might be what it was. But that's a good example of when you're, let's say you're just an average kid in shop class, and that happens to be your teacher.
Right.
Do you think now it's primarily about learning woodworking?
Of course not.
No. Of course not. No. It's primarily about this person in the room who's choosing to take up all the energy in the room.
That's right.
And what I'm just wondering is what sort of effect does this have on the average second grader whose teacher happens to be into this stuff and is sucking up all the energy. It's no longer about learning to read or learning to learn is the focus of the room and the 30 or 40 kids that are in there. It's about this person and what they're about. That seems to me like it's going to have an effect at time. And if you're one of these kids that I just wonder what you're going to be talking with, if you were to meet back up with your classmates, when you're 20 or 25 or 30 and you're just reflecting on, a season in your life where you had someone in the room who was in a position of authority, let's just say a teacher, and they seemed to be primarily about drawing attention to themselves, but they were supposed to be teaching you. Like you were supposed to be the center point of attention, but you clearly were not. What sort of loss is that, to that kid or those kids?
It's terrible. I was a school teacher when I graduated from college. I don't know if you know that.
I didn't.
I taught for a few years. I got a degree in geoscience, and I have a degree in geoscience, but my track was cultural geography. So, this is something I studied in college.
Cultural geography.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating.
I've been interested in cultures and geography and this world and how people interact. Like, this is my bag. This is my thing. And I've been interested in that. But my first grade teacher was the most amazing teacher. It's a gigantic man. He was 6'5". Imagine having a male 6'5" teacher and you're in first grade, right? He was a giant. And we came to his knees. It was so funny, all the tables we would sit at. Like they were at his shins, And so as an adult, I go back and see this guy, and he's still big, Wow. And he loved teaching. They actually made him retire because he taught for 45 or something like that years. He was incredible. And growing up in Donaldson, if you had this teacher, you all had this kind of like this little special group of, he was amazing, right? And he made me want to be a teacher. So I went to school, got my degree, and I became a teacher. I remember sitting in a class, a group of meeting with other teachers and the principal for this particular student. And this particular student needed a hug and a kick in the ass. That's what they needed. But they didn't need a special educational plan. I can sniff those out. There are kids that genuinely need their educational plan modified because they have some kind of a disability, learning something that they need help with. This dude didn't. He just needed accountability. Well, you have a thing called an IEP. It's an individualized education plan. And all these teachers just sign off on them. So somebody will come up with it and everybody will just sign off on it. Well, they gave me the one for this kid and I looked at it and I was like, oh no, I can't sign this. And you would have thought that I stripped down naked and started smacking myself with a paddle or something. They looked at me like my head was on fire. I said, what's the problem? Well, Mr. Haley, that's kind of not how it works. You just sign it. I go, no. If I sign this, I'm admitting that this kid has a disability and needs these things. He does not. And I will not sign this piece of paper. They had never encountered anything like that before. They didn't know what to do. And by the way, I never did sign it. So I have no idea. They may have gone around me and did some little shenanigan that I'm unaware of, but I never signed that paper because that kid didn't need a specialized plan. He needed accountability. Now, come from a bad background, you bet. But it wasn't about me. It was about the kid. You love them, you teach them, and you do your best. Then I got out of teaching because I was,
You put the kid's best interest ahead of your own in that particular case.
Of
and
course.
We need a lot more of that.
And I don't know what the answer to that is other than people being accountable. Like you got a guy like Ron DeSantis, and I don't know if you love him or hate him. You got a guy like Ron DeSantis in Florida. That dude ain't playing around, man. You got these teachers up there in Virginia that are being involved in these school board meetings, and they're getting involved. Now, I don't have kids in public school, but it does affect me because public school kids make up a big proportion of our society. So I'm not going to sit back and say, well, my kids are homeschooled. Doesn't affect me. No, it does affect
Sure it does.
When you can't make change because you didn't learn simple math or when you are indoctrinated with all this crap, it makes a difference.
Yep.
And so so it's very dangerous for somebody to say, well, that ain't my thing. It doesn't bother me. It does affect you. But you got to get involved. You've got to get involved in these school systems. You've got to get involved in these meetings, and you've got to pay attention, and you've got to read, and you've got to look at what they're passing. You got to be careful who you vote into these things and hold them accountable. And then you got to have strong leaders at the governmental level, at the state level, and at the local level. So you got a guy like DeSantis, man, he's holding these people's feet to the fire. Is Florida perfect? Of course not. But it's the second most populous state in the country. I believe it's second to California. It may be third. It's between them and Texas and Florida. It's back and forth. And he's got a lot of people, a lot of diversity. It's a huge state with some distinct areas, that are pretty different. The Panhandle, is very different from Miami.
Yeah,
no doubt. But he has proven what has happened when you put in common sense, practical solutions, and governance that is for the people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He's proven what happens when you do that. You can love Trump or hate Trump, but I'm telling you, Trump spit in the face of a lot of that stuff. Mm-hmm. Trump was dangerous. This sounds like a conspiracy theorist, but more and more it's not. We're seeing this stuff true. Trump was the first person since Nixon. So you had the Cultural Revolution in China, a girl with the red scarf. There's another book that'll blow your hair back. You got to read that one. And that was about a girl that went through the Cultural Revolution in China in 1966, 1967. That was incredible. So you had that go through then, and then in 1970, I think it was 76 or 74, one of those two. So you had it open up. China opened up to the West. They realized they needed to do that economically. So Nixon led that way during that time. May have been 1972. It was early 70s. All right, so China opens up. No one had stood up to China. No one had stood up to China. None of our presidents. And then you've got this guy in office all of a sudden, and maybe other than the people that made his neckties at some shop in China, this guy had nothing to gain or lose because of it. And so all of a sudden he's like, nope, no. We'll go back to that Scrabble game we talked about earlier. No, we're not going to play with the book. You are going to follow the rules. Mm-hmm. No, I'm not. Well, yes, you are.
Yeah.
And he held their feet to the fire. And I am convinced that is why that virus was let out. I am convinced to this day that virus was let out of that lab in Wuhan because they needed to do something to disrupt it, because that man's plan against China was working. He was the first person to hold them in check, and they needed to do something radical. Now, do I think it was completely laid out the way that it might have been? Not necessarily, but I think once it got laid out like that, they thought, here's our opportunity.
Okay. So
and then pounced on it.
Yep. Well, you may as well just go ahead and skip your wedding if we're going to get into that. Because you have a wedding at 2.
Yeah.
But I would like to hear.
Not my own wedding.
Yeah. Oh, man. So are you saying that you believe that China engineered the virus and released it on purpose?
You're darn right
purpose?
I do. I absolutely believe they did. Yes.
Well, the one thing I think that is hard to disagree with is the fact that COVID was very, very, very hard on America, and partly or maybe mostly because we were already very weak to begin with, and we just were very ill-equipped.
That's right.
Our systems and processes and leadership and
our physical health.
But even how I think it revealed a lot about how people in power can make decisions that are based on their personal financial interests.
Sure.
And not so good for other people.
Yeah. It goes back to that greed thing we talked about.
And COVID came from China.
Yeah.
And it was very hard on America, and it's going to continue to be very hard on America, even in terms of education.
Yeah.
Like we were not 37th in developed countries in math before COVID. We were a little better.
Right.
And now it's ludicrous.
Right.
So, well, maybe we need to have you back on and talk more about that, because I would like to hear a lot more about that, because that's a very bold statement.
It worked.
Well, it definitely worked.
The man's not the president anymore.
It definitely worked.
And so I don't necessarily think that it might have been a grand scheme with point A, point B, point C, point D, point so-and-so. Mm-hmm. But I definitely think that there was something afoot that said, look, we need something major to stop this guy. He's kicking us in the teeth. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what they did.
Are you aware of that university in Austin, Texas, University of Austin, that's sort of an anti-woke university? Mm-hmm. I was looking that up a little bit more. I'd heard about it a little while ago, and then I think things like that is an area to me that is like those are glimmers of hope.
Yeah.
If Harvard and Yale want to just be wrapped up doing their thing, and some of those colleges they seem to be happy to push a particular narrative.
Sure.
Maybe we can let it go at that for the sake of time, and then like the University of Austin is basically saying, okay, do your thing, but then we're going to start our own thing over here, and then the people can decide.
Right.
And that seems to be an area of hope.
Do you mean free market choice? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, I just mean giving other alternatives that aren't so
Free
wrapped
market
up in
choice.
pushing a particular narrative. All right, we got to get you out of here. What areas are you most optimistic about in terms of course correcting? Because I think we would agree that there's a lot that appears to be on the wrong course. And can I just clarify, this is not, again, when you look at what this country has gone through from 1900 to the year 2000, I mean, it's a lot, right? A lot.
Insane.
So I'm less worried about like us against what's going to come at us and more worried about what's happening within.
Yeah.
It seems to be that's where it's going to be the real problem is what's happening within. So
that happened to the Roman Empire. I mean, the Roman Empire collapsed from within. That's most big civilizations collapse from within. It's not an exterior threat. It may be an exterior threat that militarily finishes them off,
right?
But they were weakened from inside. It's like a tree. This is a great example. You take a tree that looks strong from the outside, but it has root rot, or it's got a disease that affects the inside of the tree, and then one day this beautiful, healthy-looking tree just goes one windstorm. Well, how did it push this mighty tree with these gigantic roots that went down 20, 30, 50, 100 feet? How did it do that? Well, because it was rotten from the inside.
Yeah, that's a very good example.
And so what people like China understand is they know what causes that rot. They know that it's greed. They know that it's wokeism. They know that it's divisiveness. They want me to hate my opponent politically. Mm-hmm. Listen, if you are a left-wing ideologist, I don't hate you. We disagree, but I don't hate you. And so can we sit down and have a conversation? We've got a friend of ours, and they come to the house once a week, and she's precious, and she leans left, very left actually. And we'll have her at our kitchen table. We'll eat breakfast together. And she says, I've never seen anything like this. The way you treat me. I'm like, why would I treat you any different? But I am interested why you think the way you think. And here's the interesting thing is that we actually want many of the same things. We care about people. We want to help people. We want to make folks better than they are. Well, we both agree on that. It's the path or the means to do that. That's where we disagree. Mm-hmm. And so I think one of the things, you've got organizations like PragerU. I think PragerU is teaching some good stuff out there. Prager University is teaching some good things. I think having a loud voice of people like Joe Rogan, Russell Brand, he's a
the actor attorney.
Yeah, man. I mean, seeing people like that. He had Tim Robbins on his show the other day. Tim Robbins is the famous actor from Shawshank Redemption, Bull Durham, places like that. And he was on there and he was talking about how obsessed he was with falling in line with the narrative at the beginning of COVID. And this guy apologized. This is a left-wing nut job. I mean, this guy is as far left as it gets. And he was apologizing that he was that staunch about following the narrative and more than anything, treating people who thought differently about it than he did. And he was very apologetic. Well, that gives me hope. Seeing Disney's stock price gives me hope. Watching them get bashed in the face financially, that gives me hope. Seeing people go, no, I'm not going to subscribe to that anymore. There was a wonderful movie back in the, I guess, 90s, 2000s called The Truman Show with Jim Carrey. Did you ever see that?
I did, yeah.
So it's about this guy was born and it was a big corporate, and Christos was the name of the guy that created the show. Christos, Christ, he was very Christ-like. I'm the Father. it was a spit in the eye to that, right? And at the very end of the movie, he decides, once he finds out he's in this bubble world, he decides he doesn't want to be part of it. And he finds this door to the back of the studio, and he bows, and he walks out the door. Mm-hmm. Now, these people have been watching this guy for 35 years. They've been watching him. They watched him grow up. It was the show that everybody had on their TVs. And immediately, it's the greatest part of the movie. The guy, he goes, so one guy's sitting next to the other one. He goes, So he walked out of the studio and he goes, I wonder what's on the other channel. It's fantastic. What that meant was that we tend to get consumed by things and then very quickly can just switch it and turn it. And so here were these people consumed by watching the Truman Show, and then it just ended. And they just turned the channel and just went on with their lives. And so I think that one of the things I'm optimistic about is that we get caught up into ourselves. Like ESPN you have to have it. No, people are just starting to turn it off. Mm-hmm. I have other choices. I'm just going to turn it off. Mm-hmm. And some of those choices are, I'm going to turn my TV off in general. Like, go outside and hike.
Yep.
You know.
So you can vote with your attention.
You can. Sam Walton said, the customer is the boss, and they can fire everyone from the CEO all the way down to the stock boy just by going somewhere else and spending their money there.
I love that.
So,
Rick Haley, thank you for coming back on the podcast. This was fun.
It's good.
Really enjoyed it. And thank you for, I only texted you a little bit ago.
Yeah.
So, anything else you want to say in closing here?
I am more optimistic, I think, than I sound. There are pockets of optimism that I have. Mm-hmm. We've got friends and their families, and they're teaching their kids right. And I love to see that. And I am optimistic for those kids. But fight. Speak up. Be a voice. Don't be afraid to come on a podcast like this. Don't be afraid to speak up when it is your turn, when it's not your turn. Right is right. And I think that if people who know right from wrong don't do anything about it, then I think that's worse from somebody that doesn't know right from wrong, creating atrocities. If you know right from wrong.
Yeah, doesn't the Bible say something about that?
I think it does. It's somewhere in there.
Yeah, I think so.
I think so.
Good stuff. All
Thanks
right, Rick. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Really enjoyed it. Have fun at the wedding this afternoon.
You got it.
Okay,
Thanks.
see you guys.
Try to catch me howling at the moon.